The courtroom air, stale with aged documents and simmering grievances, pressed down like a humid shroud. Above, fluorescent tubes buzzed, their stark light unforgiving against the scuffed wood of the pews. Judge Thompson, his face a roadmap of cynicism and wry amusement, took in the scene from his dais. A weighty, ebony gavel anchored his hand. "Let's expedite this, shall we?" he declared, his voice a gravelly rasp, like a file against seasoned timber. "A golf course beckons." First up, a Mr. Henderson, accused of unleashing his pampered Pekingese, Princess Fluffy but 3, upon Mrs. Gable's prized petunias. Henderson, a cadaverous man plagued by watery eyes, swore the dog had been framed. Gable, a woman of imposing stature, brandished snapshots of the princess mid-rampage, floral devastation in her wake. "Mr. Henderson," Thompson sighed, massaging his temples. "Are you seriously positing that Mrs. Gable staged a floral apocalypse to incriminate Princess Fluffy but the Third?" Henderson wrung his hands, sweat beading at his brow. "Your Honor, she's a sensitive creature. She wouldn't harm a hair, let alone a petunia." Thompson's brow arched. "The evidence paints a different picture. I sentence Princess Fluffy but the Third to community service. 7 days of scooping duties at the local dog park. Mr. Henderson, you'll be her personal chaperone." Henderson looked condemned. Gable, however, radiated triumph. Next, 2 collegians squabbling over a parking spot like rival badgers contesting territory. The evidence consisted of blurry phone pics and tangled testimonies, amounting to precisely 0 cents. Thompson, with superhuman patience, steered them toward resolution, mandating a coin toss. The loser endured a month of car-washing servitude. Grumbles echoed, but the case concluded. Then came Mrs. Periwinkle, a gentle octogenarian charged with pigeon feeding. Her gratuitous offerings of stale crusts had, apparently, summoned a feathered plague. Periwinkle pleaded loneliness as the motive. A flicker of compassion in his gaze, Thompson spared her punishment, advising a shift to birdseed. "Less pungent, Mrs. Periwinkle. The city will be in your debt." Each case, a miniature drama of frustration, a testament to the mundane squabbles saturating the court's calendar. Thompson navigated them with a blend of world-weariness and startling common sense, meting out justice with a minimalist flourish and a cutting remark. Yet beneath the gruffness, something lingered. A hint that he actually cared, in his own peculiar manner, for the individuals before him. That spark had, decades past, drawn him to the legal profession. He'd envisioned himself a champion, a bulwark against injustice. Reality, he'd discovered, was far more prosaic. The morning lumbered onward, a relentless march of trivial infractions and neighborhood spats. Thompson's impatience swelled with each pronouncement. He yearned for the manicured green, the satisfying percussion of club on ball. His gaze drifted to the clock above the entrance, willing time to accelerate. At long last, the court clerk, a young woman with weary eyes and an echoing voice, announced a name that bisected the monotonous drone. "Kaito." A hush blanketed the room. Thompson surveyed the assembly, his gaze encompassing the usual cast of characters, defendants, attorneys, rubberneckers. But no Ito. "Kaito?" the clerk repeated, her voice amplified slightly. From the courtroom's rear, a form materialized out of the shadows. A young man, hardly shaving age, with an unassuming air and eyes that hinted at uncanny depths. His attire, a simple, slightly oversized suit, spoke of thrift. He moved with measured composure, his focus locked on the judge. Thompson's eyebrows shot skyward. "You're Kaito?" he queried, a note of skepticism lacing his tone. The youth nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're representing yourself?" "Pro se, Your Honor." Thompson leaned back, a flicker of amusement glinting in his eyes. A kid. Self-representation. This promised either spectacular failure or mild diversion. Either way, it would certainly impact his tea time. "Mr. Ito, the court is aware that you are charged with trespassing and property damage. Do you comprehend these charges?" Kai affirmed with a nod. "Yes, Your Honor." His timbre, low but articulate, possessed a surprising authority that belied his youth. Thompson shuffled through the documents arrayed before him, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Well, Mr. Ito, enlighten us. Keep it succinct. My irons are calling. Kai inhaled deeply, his gaze briefly sweeping the gallery before returning to the judge. Your Honor, with respect, I believe the charges stem from a misunderstanding, and a rather unfortunate incident involving irrigation. Thompson chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. Irrigation, you say? I'm all ears, Mr. Ito. But be warned, I've heard elaborate tales in my time. You'll have to surpass the story about the belligerent sprinkler. As Kai began, weaving a tale both articulate and surprisingly persuasive, a figure shifted in the gallery. Mr. Davies, the property owner, watched with a mixture of distrust and thinly veiled disdain. He saw not a youth striving for justice, but a nuisance, a threat to the community. Davies wasn't alone in his appraisal. A ripple of murmurs coursed through the room, a blend of curiosity and doubt. Some saw a naive child in over his head. Others, a wily trickster attempting to bamboozle the court. Preconceived notions constrained their perceptions like invisible fetters. Judge Thompson, however, glimpsed something more. He'd initially dismissed Ito as another lost cause swallowed by the system. Yet as Kai spoke, he noted intelligence, a legal acumen beyond his years. He saw a reflection of his own youthful zeal, a fervent belief in justice. But the memory of his lost idealism also stirred unease. He recalled a case, long past, where haste and youthful hubris had yielded a wrongful conviction. A case that continued to haunt his sleep. He recognized the perils of snap judgments, of allowing bias to cloud his reason. Mr. Ito, Thompson interrupted, his tone losing its levity. You claim you were attempting to retrieve something from Mr. Davies' property. What was it? Kai hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was a personal item, Your Honor, belonging to my grandfather. And what was this item? Thompson pressed, sensing a withholding. Before Kai could respond, a voice erupted from the gallery. Objection, Your Honor! Irrelevant! Davies, his face scarlet with ire, surged to his feet, his voice shaking. This kid is abusing the court's time with his lies. He was trespassing, pure and simple. He should face the maximum penalty. Thompson frowned. Mr. Davies, I understand your emotions, but I require all the facts. Mr. Ito, continue. Kai took a breath. Your Honor, the item was a journal. A journal belonging to my grandfather, who was once employed by Mr. Davies. A collective intake of breaths swept through the courtroom. The atmosphere crackled. Thompson leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Kai. And what, he asked, his voice hushed, was so crucial about this journal? Before Kai could elaborate, another voice cut in. A woman, positioned at the courtroom's edge. Tall and poised, she commanded silence. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear. I am Ms. Evans, with the Legal Aid Society. I request permission to represent Mr. Ito. Thompson studied Evans, his face inscrutable. He sensed that this case, initially a trivial matter, was about to escalate exponentially. His tea time was officially a distant memory. 12 years old and a contract. Judge Thompson leaned back, the leather of his chair protesting with a sharp squeak that punctuated the courtroom's hush. Fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin, he scrutinized the young man before him. Ito. The name, coupled with the defendant's slender frame and excessively formal suit, set off alarm bells. Another do-gooder tying up his docket, likely. Mr. Ito. Thompson's voice, a resonant baritone capable of unsettling seasoned criminals, let alone someone who looked barely post-pubescent, filled the room. The report details trespassing and property defacement. Do you grasp the severity of these charges? Kai Ito met his gaze unflinchingly. A quiet assurance radiated from him, a contained energy evident in the set of his jaw, belying his youth. I do, Your Honor. And you intend to represent yourself? One eyebrow arched in skeptical appraisal. He'd witnessed countless self-representations crash and burn spectacularly. This one, however, was alarmingly young. Affirmative, Your Honor, came the crisp reply, devoid of any tremor Thompson anticipated. Thompson suppressed a weary sigh. This promised to be an arduous morning. Very well, Mr. Ito. Let's hear your account. Succinctly, if you please. I've a schedule to maintain. Kai drew a steadying breath. Your Honor, the area in question, specifically the northern section adjoining the creek, is governed by a legally binding agreement between Mr. Davies, the complainant, and myself. A ripple of hushed conversation traversed the gallery. Thompson's brow furrowed deeper. An agreement? This was escalating into the bizarre. An agreement? At your age? Elaborate. A land management accord, Your Honor. Duly signed and witnessed. With a measured movement, Kai's hand started toward his briefcase, pausing for the judge's approval. Thompson waved a dismissive hand. Proceed. Let's examine this alleged document. Carefully, Kai withdrew a substantial, bound volume. The pages possessed an antique quality, tinged yellow at the edges. He approached the bench and offered it to the bailiff, who, after a cursory glance, passed it to Judge Thompson. Thompson, with seasoned expertise, perused the document. Indeed, a contract, dense with legal intricacies. He scanned the signatures. There they were, etched in faded ink, K. Ito adjacent to A. Davies. The date, 12 years prior. His gaze snapped up, hardening. You entered into a legally binding contract at age 12? With Mr. Davies? He shot a pointed look toward the plaintiff's table. Arnold Davies, whose complexion was fast approaching puce, sputtered incoherently. Precisely, Your Honor. I was 12. Mr. Davies was... Kai hesitated, choosing his words with care. More receptive at that juncture. Thompson rubbed a hand across his face, the rasp of his stubble audible in the quiet. Utterly preposterous. Mr. Davies, is this document authentic? Davies found his voice, a strangled croak. It's a load of rubbish. I was merely indulging a child. I never imagined. Never imagined what, Mr. Davies? Thompson pressed, his voice now laced with steel. Never imagined a 12-year-old would hold you to your commitments? Davies subsided into silence, his face a study in frustrated fury. Thompson returned his attention to Kai. Mr. Ito, the court is intrigued yet frankly dubious. This contract, if legitimate, would obliterate the trespassing charges. However, its validity is highly questionable, given the unusual circumstances. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Here's our course of action, Mr. Ito. I will pose a series of straightforward questions. You will answer them honestly. If your responses, your demeanor, and the sheer outlandishness of this scenario convince me of your sincerity, I am prepared to consider dismissing the charges. Kai nodded slowly, his expression inscrutable. And if I deem you untruthful? Thompson's voice dropped to a near whisper. Then I shall not only uphold the trespassing charges, but also recommend a full inquiry into potential fraud. Do you comprehend? Kai met his penetrating stare without wavering. I comprehend, Your Honor. A flicker of amusement danced in Thompson's eyes as he re-steepled his fingers. Splendid, Mr. Ito. Let's play a little game. I call it truth or consequences. A gasp echoed from the gallery. Ms. Evans, from the Legal Aid Society, pursed her lips, a frown developing between her brows. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers poised above the keyboard. Thompson remained impervious. He relished the unexpected, cutting through legal jargon to reach the core truth. Something about this Ito kid, about the faint ink on that archaic contract, had truly piqued his interest. First query, Mr. Ito, Thompson stated, his voice incisive. What prompted this quest for a land use agreement? What was so vital about that sliver of creekside property that you, a mere boy, felt compelled to entangle yourself in a legal contract with an adult? Kai inhaled deeply. Your Honor, my grandfather often told me stories about the creek. A place of profound natural beauty, a sanctuary for local fauna. He also stressed its fragility, its vulnerability to reckless development. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if accessing a vivid memory. Mr. Davies' parcel abuts the creek. I feared the potential implications of his plans. Thompson leaned forward, skepticism wrestling with burgeoning curiosity. Feared enough to draft a legal contract? Precisely, Your Honor. I researched riparian rights, environmental regulations, and contract law. My objective was to safeguard the creek. Thompson raised an eyebrow. At 12? Affirmative, Your Honor. Thompson paused, studying Kai intently. The boy held his gaze, unwavering, revealing no nervous tics. His voice remained steady, his composure unruffled. Either a monumental performance or... Second query, Mr. Ito. Thompson continued, dismissing his doubts. What specific rights did this contract confer upon you, and what obligations did it impose on Mr. Davies? Without hesitation, Kai answered. The agreement grants me the right to conduct periodic ecological assessments of the property bordering the creek. It also grants me the ability to implement erosion control measures, with Mr. Davies' collaboration, naturally. Mr. Davies is obligated to maintain a 50-foot buffer zone along the creek bank, abstain from specific pesticides and herbicides within said zone, and consult with me regarding any development proposals that might negatively impact the creek's ecosystem. Thompson emitted a low whistle. A comprehensive agreement, indeed. For someone so young. He glanced at Davies, his face now bearing the hue of an overripe eggplant. Third query, Mr. Ito, Thompson said, his tone sharpening. If this contract is so critical to you, why did you wait 12 years to enforce it? Why is this court hearing about this matter only now? Kai's expression tightened. Your Honor, I attempted enforcement on numerous prior occasions. I dispatched letters to Mr. Davies, delineating my concerns. I even sought to engage him in personal conversation. However, he resolutely dismissed the contract's validity, writing me off as a child. Furthermore, Your Honor, I lack the resources and the legal acumen to pursue the matter further. Until now? Thompson prompted. Until now, Kai confirmed. Thompson leaned back, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. The gallery was overflowing, every face fixed on Kai with a mixture of incredulity and fascination. Ms. Evans was scribbling furiously in her notepad. Even the bailiff seemed engrossed. He refocused on Kai, his expression unreadable. One final question, Mr. Ito. A question that transcends legalities, contracts, and riparian rights. A question that cuts to the very core. He paused for effect. Why? What makes this creek so meaningful to you? What is it about this insignificant stretch of land that compels you to stand here, in this courtroom, risking potential fraud charges to protect it? Kai's voice faltered for the first time. He seemed to age before Thompson's eyes, boyish confidence giving way to a vulnerability that resonated deep within the judge. Your Honor, Kai said, his voice barely audible. My grandfather, he passed away several years ago. He never saw the creek protected. This contract, it's not merely about the land. It's about honoring his memory. It's about fulfilling a promise. Silence descended, the weight of Kai's words settling upon the courtroom. Thompson recalled his own father, the promises exchanged, both kept and broken. The memory of a past case, where his certitude led to devastating misjudgment, resurfaced. He looked at Kai, at the sincerity in his eyes, the trembling in his hands. He looked at the faded ink of the contract, at the simmering rage on Davies' face. His decision was made. Mr. Ito, Thompson announced, his voice imbued with a newfound conviction. The court finds your testimony compelling. However, I am not yet inclined to dismiss the charges entirely. This contract necessitates further scrutiny, a more thorough investigation. He turned to Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans, the court formally requests that the Legal Aid Society provide Mr. Ito with capable legal counsel. The complexities of this case exceed initial assessment. Ms. Evans nodded, relief evident on her face. Thompson returned his gaze to Kai. Mr. Ito, I am granting a continuance. You will reappear before this court in 2 weeks, accompanied by legal representation. At that time, we shall determine the validity of this contract and decide upon the appropriate course of action. He brought down his gavel with resounding force. This case is adjourned. A game of honesty. The bailiff's voice, amplified by the expectant hush, sliced through the courtroom air. All rise. Judge Thompson, a crease etched deep between his brows, returned to the bench, the swish of his robes preceding the heavy thud of his settling. A flick of his wrist signaled everyone to sit. Mr. Ito, he began, his tone now edged with a clinical detachment. We're going to attempt something unconventional. Consider it an exercise, if you will. He paused, assessing Kai's reaction. The youth remained a study in composure, dark eyes locked on the judge. I'm calling it truth or lie, Thompson elucidated, an enigmatic spark flickering in his eyes. I'll pose a series of questions. Answer honestly. If I deem your response truthful, we proceed. Suspect deception, and I'll probe further. Determine you are lying, there will be repercussions. The final word hung, a thinly veiled admonition. Kai's measured nod offered tacit agreement. I understand, Your Honor. His voice remained level, masking any anxiety Thompson anticipated witnessing. Ms. Evans, flanking Kai, leaned in imperceptibly, her face a tapestry of concern and burgeoning curiosity. This deviation from protocol had clearly taken her by surprise, she having not been consulted. Thompson tented his fingers, a steeple of authority. The purpose, Mr. Ito, isn't to ensnare you, but to unearth the truth. Your truth. Do you consent to these terms? Yes, Your Honor. Very well. Let's commence. First question, your name? Kai Ito, Your Honor. Thompson stifled a sigh. Self-evident. Next. Your age, Mr. Ito? 17, Your Honor. My birthday falls on July 12th. Thompson cross-referenced the data in his file, a faint susurrus cutting through the silence. The records corroborate this. Good. Tell me, Mr. Ito, any prior arrests? No, Your Honor. Kai's gaze remained unwavering, meeting the judge's squarely. Previous accusations of trespassing? No, Your Honor. Thompson reclined slightly, eyes sharpening like honed steel. Currently enrolled in school? Yes, Your Honor. Northwood High School. Senior year. Academic performance, Mr. Ito? A subtle note of skepticism colored Thompson's tone. Predominantly A's, Your Honor. A solitary B in advanced placement calculus. An eyebrow arched skyward. Calculus? You strike me as possessing a stronger affinity for the humanities. The words, escaping before full consideration, betrayed a latent prejudice. Kai registered no reaction to the subtle barb. I find enjoyment in mathematics, Your Honor. And post-graduation aspirations, Mr. Ito? University, Your Honor. I've submitted applications. To which institutions? Thompson pressed. Stanford, MIT, Caltech, and the University of Michigan. A soft susurration swept through the gallery. Even Mr. Davies, arms crossed, face set in disapproval, appeared momentarily taken aback. Those were bastions of academia, attracting the nation's sharpest minds. Thompson, however, remained impassive. Ambitious. Field of study? Law, Your Honor. This time, the murmur swelled, more pronounced. Ms. Evans shifted, a subtle smile gracing her features. Thompson leaned forward, eyes narrowed to slits. Law, you say? Intriguing. The rationale, Mr. Ito? A belief in justice, Your Honor. And the conviction that law, fairly applied, serves as a potent instrument for societal good. Thompson emitted a soft snort. Idealistic. Familiar with the concept of stare decisis? Kai's answer was immediate. Yes, Your Honor. The legal doctrine mandating adherence to precedents established in earlier rulings. It fosters consistency and predictability in legal application. Thompson paused, weighing the response. Accurate, succinct, delivered with an aplomb that belied his youth. He chose to delve deeper. Differentiate ratio decidendi from obiter dicta. Without a moment's hesitation, Kai articulated. The ratio decidendi represents the core legal principle upon which a court's judgment rests. It forms the binding rationale that subsequent courts must follow in analogous cases. Obiter dicta, conversely, comprises statements made by the court tangential to the court decision. Persuasive, but not binding precedent. A ripple of impressed murmurs resonated through the chamber. Even seasoned legal professionals exchanged glances of surprise. Ms. Evans now wore an open smile, radiating pride. Mr. Davies, however, appeared increasingly agitated, shifting in his seat, his face flushing crimson. Judge Thompson, his initial skepticism slowly dissipating, felt a flicker of something. Respect? Curiosity? He couldn't quite define it. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. Very well, Mr. Ito. You demonstrate a remarkable understanding of legal concepts for a non-lawyer. Where did you acquire such knowledge? Through study, Your Honor. Study? Where? Law school in your free time? Thompson's tone dripped with sarcasm. I read legal treatises, Your Honor. Researched case law. And my grandfather, he was a remarkable instructor. Kai's voice softened perceptibly, a hint of emotion seeping through. Thompson recalled Kai's earlier allusion to honoring his grandfather's memory. He decided to explore this avenue. Tell me about your grandfather, Mr. Ito. He was a farmer, Your Honor. He instilled in me the values of diligence, integrity, and standing firm for one's convictions. He also imparted a significant understanding of the law. In what manner? Thompson inquired, genuine curiosity piqued. He believed in universal legal literacy, Your Honor. He possessed a modest collection of legal texts, and he encouraged me to peruse them. We frequently engaged in discussions of various cases, with him elucidating the underlying legal principles. And the nature of these cases? Thompson pursued. Diverse, Your Honor. Contract, property, environmental. He held a particular fascination with those concerning land and water rights. Thompson's eyes narrowed perceptibly. And the reason for this? He believed access to land and water were fundamental for survival, Your Honor. That everyone deserved a fair allocation. Thompson leaned back, his mind racing. This transcended a simple trespassing case. This touched upon something deeper, more profound. He observed Kai, truly observed him, and saw not just a youth accused of wrongdoing, but an individual imbued with a deep sense of conviction and fervent commitment to justice. He glanced at Mr. Davies, his face now a mask of seething anger and resentment. The man seemed on the verge of eruption. Thompson redirected his gaze towards Kai. Mr. Ito, he said, his voice gentler now, almost solicitous. Explain in your own words why you believe you are not trespassing on Mr. Davies's property. Kai drew a deep breath, his eyes fixed resolutely on the judge. The land management agreement, Your Honor. Executed 12 years ago by my grandfather and Mr. Davies's father. It confers upon my family the right to access the creek for irrigation purposes. This agreement remains valid, and I am merely exercising the rights stipulated therein. And you believe Mr. Davies is cognizant of this agreement? Thompson inquired. Yes, Your Honor. I do. And why, then, do you believe he pursues this case against you, Mr. Ito? Kai hesitated momentarily, his expression clouding over. I cannot state definitively, Your Honor. But I suspect that Mr. Davies harbors a prejudice against my ethnicity. He views me as an interloper, as someone who doesn't belong. And he seeks to displace me, to divest my family of what is rightfully ours. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The air crackled with suppressed tension. Thompson surveyed Mr. Davies, whose face was now incandescent with rage. He looked at Kai, eyes radiating quiet resolve. And finally, he looked at Ms. Evans, observing the proceedings with intense focus. He realized, in that instant, that this was no longer a mere exercise. This was a struggle for equitable treatment. And he, Judge Robert Thompson, occupied the pivotal center. The weight of responsibility descended upon him, palpable and unavoidable. The specters of past misjudgments swirled in his memory, a chilling reminder of the consequences of prejudice and ill-considered decisions. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaled deeply, and made a decision. Upon reopening them, his gaze was unwavering. Mr. Davies, he announced, his voice resonating with authority. "I believe this matter requires deeper scrutiny. I am ordering a recess. We will reconvene tomorrow morning. And Mr. Ito," he added, turning back to Kai, "I expect you to be present, prepared to continue this game of honesty." The bailiff announced the recess, the gavel's thud echoing forcefully, and the courtroom began to empty. But Judge Thompson remained seated, his mind a maelstrom of thoughts, consumed by the young man who dared to challenge him, and the unsettling premonition that he was on the precipice of uncovering something far more complex and disturbing than he could have previously conceived. The ante is raised. Judge Thompson tented his fingers, the harsh overhead lighting glinting off his polished scalp. The break had offered a respite, yet a nagging unease lingered. He'd initially been poised to dismiss Kai as just another delinquent, but the boy's responses, their precision, the depth of his knowledge, gave him pause. This wasn't mere parroting, it was applied understanding. "All right, Mr. Ito," Thompson began, the sharp edge in his tone softening to a measured curiosity. "Let's delve into something a bit more complex." He leaned back, the leather of his chair whispering in protest. "Consider this. A municipality reclassifies a residential zone as industrial. Property values plummet. Homeowners sue, alleging the rezoning amounts to a Fifth Amendment taking, demanding just compensation. The municipality counters that the action is a legitimate exercise of its police authority, aimed at fostering economic growth. What's the crucial legal question, and how might a court approach it?" Kai didn't so much as blink. His dark eyes locked with Thompson's, a spark of something akin to relish flickering within. A beat of silence as he organized his thoughts, then he articulated his response with the same unwavering calm he previously displayed. "The pivotal legal issue revolves around whether the rezoning constitutes a regulatory taking, thus triggering the Fifth Amendment's compensation clause. The court would most likely lean on the Penn Central framework," Kai articulated, referencing the seminal Supreme Court decision. "This involves a multifaceted inquiry, weighing the regulation's financial burden on the plaintiff, specifically the degree to which it has obstructed distinct, investment-backed expectations. Further, the court would examine the nature of the state action. Is it a physical encroachment, or simply a regulation? And does the regulation materially advance valid state objectives? The court would then balance these aspects to ascertain whether a taking has, in fact, occurred." A frisson of surprise rippled through Thompson. The Penn Central test wasn't exactly introductory material. Many a fledgling law student had wrestled with it. He decided to probe deeper. "Okay," Thompson conceded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Suppose these residents acquired their properties after the municipality declared its rezoning intentions, but before it actually happened. Does that shift your analysis?" A slight frown creased Kai's brow, a telltale sign of genuine contemplation. He wasn't merely reciting rote answers, he was actively engaging with the hypothetical. "It certainly adds a layer of complexity," Kai conceded thoughtfully. "The court would likely scrutinize the reasonableness of the residents' investment-backed expectations. Purchasing property knowing of impending rezoning arguably weakens their claim. The municipality could contend that the residents assumed the risk inherent in the rezoning's impact on property values. The residents, however, could rebut that a mere announcement didn't guarantee rezoning, and that they relied on then extant zoning laws at the time of purchase. The court would likely weigh the level of the municipality's commitment to the rezoning at the moment of purchase, alongside the reasonableness of the residents' reliance on the original zoning." Evelyn Evans, who had been watching the exchange with growing fascination, subtly shifted. She'd initially seen Kai as just another statistic, another disadvantaged youth ensnared by the system. But his answers were arresting. She'd witnessed seasoned attorneys stumble over similar hypothetical situations. This kid possessed something special. She leaned forward almost imperceptibly, focus laser sharp. Thompson, equally captivated, pressed forward. "All right, one more. Let's pivot from takings. A local ordinance prohibits distributing pamphlets on public sidewalks without a permit. An environmental advocacy group is denied a permit, the city council deeming their message too controversial. They sue, alleging the ordinance infringes on their First Amendment rights. What is the standard of review, and what arguments could either side advance? Kai's response was immediate, assured. The ordinance represents a content-based restriction on speech, empowering the City Council to deny permits based on message content. Such restrictions are subject to strict scrutiny. The city would bear the burden of demonstrating the ordinance is narrowly tailored to serve a compelling government interest. The advocacy group could argue the ordinance is excessively broad and stifles protected expression, proposing less restrictive alternatives like time, place, and manner restrictions that don't discriminate based on content. The city would likely assert its compelling interest is maintaining public order and ensuring unobstructed sidewalks, but the group could retort that the ordinance is not precisely tailored to achieve these ends. Thompson expelled a low breath, impressed in spite of himself. All right, Mr. Ito. You've certainly done your homework. A pause as he contemplated his next move. While he still wasn't entirely convinced of Kai's innocence, his legal prowess was undeniable. He decided to alter his tack once more. He needed insight into Kai's motivations, his connection to the land, the font of his uncommon knowledge. Tell me, Mr. Ito, Thompson inquired, his voice gentler. What fuels your interest in the law? Kai hesitated, appearing taken aback by the question. The confident veneer seemed to crack, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability beneath. I believe in justice, Your Honor, he responded, his voice quiet yet resolute. I believe the law should be equitable, applied fairly to all. But that's not always the reality. And you believe you can change that? Thompson challenged, raising an inquisitive brow. I want to try, Kai asserted, meeting Thompson's gaze with unwavering conviction. I want to study law, to comprehend it, and to wield it to assist those who cannot advocate for themselves. A wave of sympathy washed over Ms. Evans. His words struck a chord, echoing her own reasons for pursuing law. She perceived in him a flicker of idealism, a genuine desire to effect positive change. She now leaned toward the belief that his presence on Mr. Davies's property stemmed not from malice, but from something else entirely. Perhaps a flawed attempt to redress a perceived injustice. Where did you acquire all this? Thompson asked, gesturing toward Kai's legal arguments. You're 17. Most kids your age are consumed with proms and pep rallies, not the Penn Central test. Kai shifted uneasily. It was the inquiry he dreaded. He preferred to conceal his secret, avoid further scrutiny. I read a lot, he replied evasively. I'm interested in the subject. Thompson wasn't convinced. Reading is one thing, Mr. Ito. Grasping and applying legal principles as you have demonstrated is quite another. Who has been tutoring you? Kai remained silent, his jaw tightening. He wouldn't answer. Mr. Ito, Thompson pressed, his voice firm yet understanding. I'm endeavoring to understand the situation. You're undeniably an intelligent young man, possessing a remarkable grasp of the law. Yet you stand accused of trespassing. Help me bridge the gap. Kai inhaled deeply, weighing his options. He knew he couldn't maintain the facade indefinitely. However, revealing the truth carried significant risks, not only for himself, but potentially for others. There's a land stewardship agreement, Kai revealed, his voice barely audible. Between my grandfather and Mr. Davies's father. Thompson leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. A land stewardship agreement? Elaborate. Kai hesitated again, then continued. My grandfather used to manage the property for Mr. Davies's father. They had a compact that permitted my family to continue using a portion of the land for traditional practices. Traditional practices? Thompson repeated, his brow furrowed in confusion. What kind of practices? Cultural practices, Kai clarified. My family has utilized that land for generations. It holds profound significance for us. And Mr. Davies is attempting to prevent you? Thompson inquired, sensing the underlying conflict. He claims the agreement is no longer enforceable, Kai responded, his voice laced with bitterness. He asserts it was merely a verbal understanding, and that he bears no obligation to honor it. Ms. Evans's mind raced. A land stewardship agreement, traditional practices, the pieces were falling into place. She suspected a protracted history behind this case, one marred by broken promises and cultural misunderstandings. She understood that these types of conflicts could be exceedingly intricate, encompassing not only legal considerations, but also deeply entrenched cultural values and historical grievances. Thompson sighed, rubbing a weary hand over his shiny scalp. The case became progressively complicated by the minute. He'd initially considered it a straightforward trespassing charge, but it was morphing into something far more involved, something that bordered on issues of land rights, cultural preservation, and potentially even racial bias. "All right, Mr. Ito," Thompson announced, his voice tinged with weariness. "We're going to take another recess. I require time to consider these new developments." He addressed the bailiff. 10 minutes. As Thompson pushed back his chair and started for his chambers, Ms. Evans approached Kai. "Mr. Ito," she said, her tone soft yet certain. "My name is Evelyn Evans. I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office. I'd like to speak with you." Kai looked at her, his eyes betraying a mix of hope and wariness. He recognized that he needed assistance, but he felt unsure if he could place his trust in her. "Why?" he inquired, his voice laced with doubt. "Because I suspect there's more to this narrative than meets the eye," Ms. Evans replied. "And I believe you warrant a fair hearing." She extended her business card. "Consider it, Mr. Ito. I'll be right outside." The woman in the gallery. Evelyn Evans settled against the gallery's unyielding bench, the stale scent of aged documents and hushed anticipation permeating the courtroom. Sunlight lanced through the tall windows, spotlighting dancing dust, yet her gaze remained locked on the young man before Judge Thompson, Kai Ito. He was an enigma she hadn't anticipated encountering on a mundane Tuesday in misdemeanor court. She'd witnessed countless defendants trudge through those doors, many scarcely comprehending the accusations leveled against them, let alone capable of crafting a coherent defense. Kai, however, presented a stark contrast. The manner in which he sparred with the judge's hypothetical situations, the keen light in his obsidian eyes, the understated assurance in his delivery, these elements hinted at a complexity far exceeding a simple trespassing charge. The judge, initially radiating impatience, now appeared genuinely captivated, a flicker of regard supplanting the dismissive glower previously fixed on his features. Evelyn observed as Kai elaborated on land stewardship agreements, his diction precise and calculated, referencing legal concepts seemingly beyond his years. Evelyn shifted, the stiff leather of her briefcase pressing into her ribs. Something felt amiss. Trespassing cases were typically cut and dried, authorization to be on the premises, or lack thereof. This felt different, more profound. As Kai concluded his statement, a weighty hush descended upon the courtroom. Even the court stenographer seemed to suspend her breathing, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the stillness. "Mr. Ito," he stated, his tone devoid of its earlier acerbic edge, "you assert that this understanding, this accord with the former landowner, precedes Mr. Davies's claim to the property?" "Not precedes, Your Honor," Kai amended, his voice steady as a metronome. "But it establishes a pattern. An acknowledgement of my family's long-standing ties to the land and our duty to safeguard it. It's not about titles, it's about guardianship." Evelyn discovered herself leaning forward, her attention riveted on Kai. Guardianship. A resonant word, laden with implications of accountability, heritage, and veneration for the earth. It also represented a legal minefield, particularly within estates scarred by historical land disputes and shady transactions. Judge Thompson steepled his digits, a crease forming between his brows. "And you possess documentation pertaining to this accord?" Kai hesitated, an almost imperceptible shadow flitting across his expression. Not in the conventional sense, Your Honor. It was a verbal agreement. A handshake agreement." A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the chamber. A verbal agreement. In the eyes of the law, essentially worthless. Evelyn stifled a sigh of her own. She recognized the challenge of substantiating such an agreement, the uphill struggle Kai faced. Yet, something in his bearing, the resolute conviction blazing in his eyes, gave her pause. She sensed truth. Then Kai unleashed his bombshell. My grandfather maintained a diary. It chronicles his discussions with Mr. Harding. It also contains exhaustive records of the terrain, the vegetation, the waterways, everything my family has undertaken for decades to preserve it. We have tangible proof of our stewardship. A shot of adrenaline coursed through Evelyn. A journal. That could prove persuasive, particularly if it contained consistent details and illustrated a clear pattern of land management. The judge appeared equally taken aback. A journal? And the whereabouts of this journal, Mr. Ito? It's in my possession, Your Honor. Then why wasn't it presented at the outset? Kai faltered again, his gaze momentarily dipping before reconnecting with the judge's. I wasn't convinced it would be relevant. Evelyn barely refrained from groaning aloud. Not relevant? It could unlock his entire defense. She couldn't fathom his reticence. Was it apprehension? Distrust? Or was he concealing something else entirely? Then, her name shattered the stillness. Ms. Evans? She ascended smoothly, adjusting her suit jacket. Your Honor. Ms. Evans, in light of the intricacies of this case, would you be amenable to representing Mr. Ito? Evelyn paused, feigning consideration. In reality, her decision was already resolute. She desired this case. She needed to unravel the underlying truth. Yes, Your Honor, she replied, her voice sharp and unwavering. I would be pleased to represent Mr. Ito. A wave of relief seemed to cascade over Kai's visage, a minute easing of his posture. He offered a small, almost undetectable nod. Judge Thompson reciprocated the nod. Very well. Ms. Evans, I'm granting you a continuance to examine the evidence and formulate your defense. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. He pivoted to Kai. Mr. Ito, you are free to depart, but I strongly urge you to cooperate fully with your counsel. As the courtroom began to rustle with renewed activity, Evelyn gathered her belongings, her thoughts already spiraling. She needed to examine that journal. She needed to grasp the full scope of this matter. She watched as Kai exited the chamber, his shoulders still rigid, his gaze aimed forward. There existed something about him, a muted strength, a profound sense of injustice, that resonated within her. Evelyn extracted her phone as she stepped through the courthouse doors, the balmy California sun caressing her face. She swiftly input Kai Ito into the search field. The initial results proved unremarkable. A Facebook profile offering scant details, a LinkedIn page itemizing a few miscellaneous jobs. Nothing that shed light on his apparent legal savvy. Then, she unearthed something. An article in a local online publication concerning a scholarship awarded to a Kai Ito for environmental science studies at a prestigious university. The piece highlighted his ardor for land preservation and his profound connection to his family's legacy in the area. Evelyn tapped the link, her eyes rapidly absorbing the contents. It was a fluff piece, brimming with laudatory remarks, but it provided a launchpad. She noted the name of the university and the Grant Foundation. As she ambled toward her vehicle, she persisted in scrolling through the search results. She uncovered a few more articles, largely centered on environmental activism and community endeavors. There was a snapshot of Kai planting saplings with a group of volunteers, his expression radiant with pride. The more she unearthed, the more fascinated she grew. This wasn't merely some random youth ensnared in a trespassing allegation. He was astute, impassioned, and manifestly deeply connected to the terrain he championed. But why the secrecy? Why the hesitation to disclose the journal? What was he guarding? Evelyn unlocked her car, tossing her briefcase onto the passenger seat. As she settled behind the wheel, she couldn't dispel the sensation that she had stumbled upon something far grander than a simple trespassing dispute. She ignited the engine, the smooth thrum of power filling the space. This kid, he's either brilliant or teetering on the edge. Or perhaps, a blend of both. Regardless, there's a chronicle to be unraveled. She glanced back at the courthouse, its imposing facade glistening under the afternoon sun. And I'm the one destined to share it. Exiting the parking area, she punched in a number on her phone. Hey, Maria? It's Evelyn. I need a deep dive on someone. The name's Kai Ito. Legacy of law. The ghost of aged paper and tanned hide always clung to Kai's hands, a scent evocative not of dusty neglect, but of unearthed secrets. While other boys traded baseball cards and chased high scores, Kai immersed himself in formidable legal texts. Not whimsical tales or colorful panels, but imposing volumes bristling with dense prose and antiquated Latin. His grandfather's library, a boundless chamber walled with towering shelves, served as his sanctuary. He recalled his maiden voyage into that realm, 8 years old and armed with the temerity only a child could possess, spurred by overhearing his parents discuss a property tax imbroglio. He stretched, fingers dancing across the spines until one seemed to resonate with untold significance. Property law, principles and practices. He hauled it back to a time-worn armchair, the leather yielding beneath him as he wrestled the book open. The words blurred, an unintelligible ocean of legalese. Disappointment stung, yet the palpable weight of the book, the sheer magnitude of contained knowledge, held him captive. Later, Hiroshi Ito, a lawyer retired but not diminished, his eyes etched with the wisdom of years and a voice that resonated like distant surf, discovered him slumbering there, the book a heavy blanket on his chest. He simply smiled. Intrigued by the law, are we? He inquired, his tone tender. Kai, jolted awake, stammered an embarrassed reply. Hiroshi chuckled, a sound like kindling crackling in a hearth. The law is a rapier, Kai, he observed, settling beside him. It can build cathedrals or raze them to the ground. It can shield the innocent or shackle the oppressed. Mastery lies in understanding its edge. Thus it began. Hiroshi refused to dilute the subject for Kai. Instead, he patiently illuminated the concepts, transforming opaque legal precedent into captivating narratives. Tales unfolded of landowners battling for their ancestral birthrights, of rectified injustices, and the precarious equilibrium between individual autonomy and collective welfare. He unfurled the tapestry of the Ito family's land, interlacing it with the broader saga of Hawaiian land acts and the intricate inheritance of the great Mahele. He spoke of broken covenants and the corrosion of indigenous claims, his voice hushed with a sorrow Kai, despite his youth, understood. Remember, Kai? Hiroshi would impress, a hand resting firmly on Kai's young shoulder. This Aina isn't just clods and trees. It's our genealogy, our heritage. It's inseparable from who we are. Hiroshi taught him to parse case law, not merely for the documented facts, but for the bedrock principles beneath. He revealed how to deconstruct arguments, to expose fallacies, and to formulate compelling rebuttals. He relentlessly drilled him on juridical terminology, until the esoteric definitions became intrinsic. The law is articulation, Kai, he'd declare. To command attention, you must be fluent. Their instruction extended beyond the library's walls. They traversed the property together, Hiroshi delineating the weathered stone walls, fragments of age-old agricultural terraces, the subtle undulations in the terrain demarcating property lines. He expounded upon the vital role of water rights, the delicate ecosystem sustaining their land, and the burden of responsibility inherent in its guardianship. One afternoon, they encountered a survey marker jutting from the earth, a metal sentinel planted at the edge of their property. Hiroshi halted, his expression hardening. They're perpetually encroaching, he murmured, his voice laced with steel. Forever grasping for more. He revealed how developers had been systematically nibbling at their land for years, exploiting legal ambiguities and employing aggressive maneuvers. He recounted episodes of litigation and agreements, of surrenders conceded and skirmishes lost. They perceive the land as a balance sheet, Kai, he said, his gaze clouded with subdued fury. We see it as consecrated ground. Kai recalled the surging indignation, the fierce resolve to defend their rightful inheritance. He pledged to absorb every nuance, to become a bulwark against those intent on stealing their legacy. As Kai matured, his legal tutelage acquired structure. Hiroshi enrolled him in advanced online courses, and they devoted countless hours dissecting legal dilemmas, scrutinizing briefs, and orchestrating simulated trials. Hiroshi relentlessly challenged him, demanding peak performance, yet always with an encouraging spark in his eye and a bolstering word. He perceived in Kai a fervor and commitment that mirrored his younger self. He prophesied that Kai possessed the aptitude to evolve into an exceptional lawyer, a champion for justice, and a protector of their legacy. But Hiroshi also instilled in him profound reverence for the law, an acknowledgement of its deficiencies, and the comprehension that true justice often lingered beyond the strict confines of legislation. He encouraged him to heed his conscience, to contemplate the ethical ramifications of his endeavors, and to consistently endeavor toward virtue, even when confronted with adversity. The lessons unfolded across years, interwoven with laughter and shared meals and the understated solace of their mutual devotion to the land. Kai absorbed everything, his mind a fertile ground sprouting insights, his heart swelling with a budding sense of purpose. Then, abruptly, the lesson ceased. It descended without warning. Hiroshi, normally a bastion of vigor, succumbed to cardiac arrest in his sleep. Kai discovered him ensconced in his library, encircled by his cherished volumes, a serene countenance adorning his face. The bereavement was cataclysmic. Hiroshi had been far more than a grandfather. He had been Kai's instructor, his confidant, his polestar. The library, previously a haven of joy and discovery, now exuded an oppressive chill. The funeral passed in a daze of faces and condolences. Kai stood transfixed, watching his grandfather's casket descend into the earth, feeling as if a segment of his soul was being interred alongside it. In the ensuing weeks, Kai grappled with the torment of grief. He withdrew into himself, sequestering himself in the library, surrounded by Hiroshi's books, striving to resurrect the lost connection. He retrieved the property law textbook, the very one that had sparked his initial curiosity. He traced the worn cover, recalling the afternoon Hiroshi found him dozing in the armchair. He opened the book, and the familiar passages seemed to ignite, radiating renewed significance. He absorbed the nuances of easements and covenants, of riparian rights and eminent domain. He immersed himself in legal chronicles that had molded the Hawaiian landscape, tracing the struggles of native Hawaiians to protect their ancestral lands and their culture. And he discerned that Hiroshi's teachings were not concluding, but evolving. He grasped that Hiroshi had not merely imparted the law, he had bequeathed him a legacy. A legacy of stewardship, of justice, and of unyielding dedication to safeguarding their land. He understood that he bore a responsibility to perpetuate Hiroshi's mission, to champion what was righteous, and to ensure that the Ito family's legacy would endure throughout successive generations. The magnitude of that responsibility was immense, yet Kai did not falter. He had been molded for this pivotal juncture. He was poised. The trespassing accusation, the ostensibly straightforward legal dispute that had brought him before Judge Thompson, was merely the overture. He understood that the forthcoming battle would be protracted and strenuous, but he was steadfast in his resolve. He possessed the knowledge, the ardor, and the unwavering support of his forebears. He would not betray them. He would not betray Hiroshi. He would defend their land, their heritage, and their legacy, with every atom of his being. The diary, secreted away for years, represented but a fragment of the larger mosaic. He harbored more revelations, more reasons to persevere. He simply needed the forum to be heard, to present his case, and to demonstrate that he was not merely a trespasser, but a caretaker of the land, a guardian of his family's patrimony. He had absorbed the law, not solely from texts, but from the very ground beneath his feet. And he knew, with a conviction that resonated deep within his spirit, that justice would triumph. Battling wits. A palpable tension filled the courtroom, a hushed expectancy that went beyond mere legal apprehension. Judge Thompson, his gaze laser-focused on Kai, shifted in his seat. The youth's quiet defiance, that unshakable serenity in the face of established power, still grated. He'd anticipated a mumbled apology, a desperate plea. Instead, this quiet storm. "Mr. Ito," Judge Thompson began, his voice a resonant baritone. "Let's dispense with the performance. You assert claim over this land. Upon what legal foundation? Kai met his gaze unflinchingly. The Hawaiian Organic Act of 1900, Section 99. He stated with precision. It acknowledges pre-existing property rights, including those rooted in traditional Hawaiian land management, the ahupue. A ripple of surprise spread through the gallery. Thompson masked a momentary flicker of astonishment. The Organic Act? A rarely invoked statute in a simple trespassing case. The Organic Act, Thompson echoed, a trace of incredulity coloring his voice. An interesting tack. How does it pertain to you? Do you claim direct lineage from an ahupue landholder? Indirectly, Kai countered, his voice even. My family's story is woven into that land across generations. While formal documentation of ownership under the ahupue system presents challenges, the unbroken legacy of land use by my ancestors solidifies a claim of customary rights, recognized under Hawaiian jurisprudence. Thompson tented his fingers, his eyes narrowed to slits. Customary rights are notoriously difficult to substantiate, Mr. Ito, particularly against a deed held by a private citizen. He inclined his head towards Mr. Davies, whose face was a rigid mask of barely suppressed ire. Mr. Davies possesses a clear title to the property. A title potentially built on a distorted interpretation of the mahele. Kai retorted, a spark igniting in his eyes. The Great Mahele of 1848, intended to clarify land ownership, also dispossessed numerous native Hawaiians through unfamiliarity with Western legal concepts and deceitful claims. Thompson's eyebrows arched. The mahele. They were venturing into treacherous territory, usually the domain of seasoned litigators, not teenagers facing petty charges. The boy was astute, he conceded. Perhaps too much so. Are you implying, Mr. Ito, that Mr. Davies's title is, in some way, fraudulent? Thompson inquired, maintaining an air of impartiality. I am suggesting, Kai responded, meeting the judge's gaze head-on, that a comprehensive inquiry into the origins of that title is warranted. I believe it will reveal a history of displacement and injustice. Thompson paused, considering the ramifications. This was escalating quickly beyond the scope of a simple trespassing hearing. He glanced at the clock. Other cases awaited, a strict schedule to adhere to. Yet, something about Kai's unwavering certainty, his articulate reasoning, held him in its sway. Very well, Mr. Ito, Thompson said, a hint of challenge now lacing his tone. Let us delve into this mahele, shall we? Explain, in accessible terms, how you believe it resulted in the dispossession of your ancestors. Kai inhaled deeply, regaining his composure. The mahele mandated that native Hawaiians file claims for their land within a limited time frame. Many lacked understanding of the process, couldn't afford legal representation, or remained unaware of the directive. As a result, vast swaths of land passed into the control of the government, and subsequently, Western entrepreneurs. He continued, his voice gaining resonance. My ancestors, like countless others, may have been unable to navigate this intricate system. Their claims might have been rejected on technicalities, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation. The land they had nurtured for generations, their sustenance, was suddenly vulnerable. Thompson listened intently, his initial skepticism gradually dissolving. The boy's fervor was undeniable, his knowledge impressive. But conviction and comprehension were not always synonymous with veracity. And what proof do you offer to support this assertion, Mr. Ito? Thompson pressed. Beyond your family's oral history? Kai hesitated briefly, then replied. I have been studying land deeds, historical records, and genealogical data. The process is painstaking, but I am uncovering disparities, inconsistencies that suggest the title to this land is not as unambiguous as it appears. Discrepancies, Thompson repeated, a note of skepticism coloring his tone. Imprecise discrepancies discovered by a young man lacking formal legal training? I may lack formal training, Your Honor, Kai responded, his voice resolute. But I possess something perhaps of greater value, a profound connection to this land and an unyielding resolve to discover the truth. The courtroom stilled, every eye fixed on the two figures engaged in this unusual contest of wills. Thompson felt a curious blend of annoyance and admiration. The boy was infuriatingly tenacious, yet possessed an uncommon clarity of purpose. "Let's address the issue of trespassing," Thompson said, shifting his line of inquiry. "Regardless of the historical backdrop, you were on Mr. Davies's property without authorization. That constitutes trespassing." "But the land is more than mere property, Your Honor," Kai asserted. "It is integral to my heritage, my identity. My ancestors are buried there. It holds profound cultural significance for my family." "That may be the case, Mr. Ito," Thompson countered. "But it doesn't grant you the right to disregard the law. Private property rights are fundamental." "But what happens when those rights originate from injustice?" Kai challenged, his voice gaining intensity. "What happens when the law itself is manipulated to perpetuate historical wrongs?" Thompson paused. Here was the core of the matter. The law, in its impartial severity, should serve as a safeguard against injustice. But what if the law itself was compromised, tainted by bias and historical inequities? He recalled a case from his early years. A young black man falsely accused. Thompson, eager to impress, had been quick to judge, influenced by the prosecutor's compelling evidence. The man had been exonerated years later, after a decade in prison. The memory remained a source of shame. "Are you suggesting, Mr. Ito," Thompson asked deliberately, "that I should disregard the law because you believe it is unjust?" "I am suggesting, Your Honor," Kai replied, his tone now composed and measured, "that you should consider the broader historical context, the injustices that have shaped the present situation. I am suggesting that you should look beyond the literal interpretation of the law and consider the essence of justice." Thompson was silent for a long moment, grappling with the implications of Kai's words. He glanced at Mr. Davies, who was now shifting uneasily in his seat. He scanned the faces in the courtroom, a mosaic of curiosity, concern, and anticipation. "Mr. Ito," Thompson said finally, his voice softer now, "you have raised some compelling arguments. Arguments that merit further exploration. However, I am still faced with the immediate act of trespassing." He turned to Mr. Davies. "Mr. Davies, do you wish to press charges?" Mr. Davies hesitated. He looked at Kai, then at Thompson, then back at Kai. The boy's steady gaze seemed to penetrate his carefully constructed defenses. The murmurs from the gallery had intensified, a low hum of dissent. Mr. Davies stammered. I want him to stay off my property." "That is understood," Thompson said firmly. "But do you wish to pursue criminal charges for trespassing?" Mr. Davies remained silent for what seemed an eternity. The pressure was palpable. He could feel the weight of the courtroom's scrutiny. Finally, he mumbled, "No. I don't want to press charges." A collective sigh of relief washed over the courtroom. Thompson nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "Mr. Ito, you are free to go. But I caution you to refrain from entering Mr. Davies's property until this matter is resolved." Kai inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Honor." As Kai turned to leave, Thompson felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to offer some words of encouragement. "Mr. Ito," he called out. Kai stopped and turned back. "I suggest you secure capable legal counsel," Thompson said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "This will be a protracted and arduous battle." Kai smiled, a genuine, almost luminous smile. "I intend to, Your Honor." As Kai exited the courtroom, Thompson watched him go, a spark of something akin to hope flickering within him. He remained unconvinced of the youth's claims, yet he could not deny his intellect, his passion, his steadfast dedication to his cause. He had a premonition that this was only the beginning. A drawn-out, complex, and potentially transformative beginning. He reflected on the young black man he had wrongly convicted. The law possessed great power, but it could also be a weapon. It was incumbent upon him, as a judge, to ensure that it was wielded equitably. He banged his gavel, the sound reverberating through the now emptying courtroom. "Next case." The words rang hollow. The day's events had irrevocably altered something within him. This unusual trial by words was a mirror, reflecting not just Kai's truth, but Thompson's own past failures and possibility of future growth. Intentions of drafters. Judge Thompson's leather chair groaned under his weight as he leaned back. The dismissed trespassing charges had bought Kai breathing room, but at a cost. This was no longer a mere property dispute. Title, history, and legal intricacies far exceeding the scope of his usual Honolulu cases were now in play. He tented his fingers, his gaze fixed on the young man before him. Kai stood tall, a composed bearing that belied his youth. Mr. Ito. Thompson's voice filled the chamber, a low rumble in the stillness. You've articulated a compelling argument concerning the Organic Act and its bearing on Mr. Davies' claim. You've even prompted a temporary retreat from Mr. Davies. However, let's probe deeper, shall we? Let's discuss the matter of intent. A rustle of whispers moved through the gallery. Intent, the invisible hand that could dismantle even the most carefully constructed legal edifice. An elusive phantom, it danced just beyond the grasp of legal certainty. Specifically, Thompson pressed, his eyes sharpening. I want you to address the intentions of those who drafted the original documents underpinning Mr. Davies' title, generations ago. The architects of this land claim. What evidence do you possess to suggest their purpose deviated from a lawful transfer of ownership, according to prevailing laws and customs? Kai's unwavering composure faltered for a fraction of a second. This was uncharted territory. The Organic Act was codified, public knowledge. Intent, however, resided in the hearts and minds of the deceased, buried under decades of precedent and interpretation. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, his gaze drawn to the broad windows offering a vista of the city. The Hawaiian sun poured through the panes, illuminating the swirling dance of dust motes. He had to calibrate his words with precision. One errant step, one flawed inference, could topple the entire defense. Your Honor, Kai began, his tone measured despite the storm within. The question of intent is undeniably intricate. But I submit that its examination must occur within the context of its era, specifically, the circumstances surrounding the Mahele. Thompson's eyebrow arched in interest. And that context, Mr. Ito, would be? A context of intense duress, Your Honor. A period when the Hawaiian monarchy faced mounting economic and political pressure from Western powers, notably the United States. A time when the traditional Hawaiian land system, the bedrock of our people for centuries, was being dismantled and supplanted by a Western model of private ownership. Kai paused, allowing his words to resonate. The courtroom's collective attention pressed upon him, a palpable anticipation hanging in the air. He needed to bridge the divide, to convey that this extended beyond a mere parcel of land. It encompassed a history of injustice, a legacy of broken pledges. The drafters of those initial documents, he resumed, operated within a framework intrinsically biased against the Hawaiian people. Many were Western advisors, entrepreneurs, and politicians with a vested interest in acquiring Hawaiian territories. To posit that their intentions were purely benevolent, or that they acted solely in the best interests of the Hawaiian populace, is to disregard the stark realities of that epoch. Thompson leaned forward, his expression indecipherable. Are you alleging, Mr. Ito, that these individuals deliberately conspired to defraud the Hawaiian people? I am suggesting, Your Honor, Kai countered, meeting Thompson's gaze unflinchingly, that their actions, irrespective of their individual motivations, resulted in the dispossession of native Hawaiians from their ancestral lands. The Mahele, ostensibly designed to establish private property ownership, ultimately led to the concentration of the vast majority of Hawaiian land within a small circle of Westerners and Hawaiian elites. He swept his hand, encompassing the lawyers, the observers, the very bones of the courtroom. We continue to bear the weight of those decisions today. We grapple still with the consequences of the Mahele and its enduring impact on the Hawaiian people. A woman in the gallery, her face etched with worry, reached for and clasped the hand of the person beside her. A nearly inaudible exhalation escaped an elderly man seated at the rear, his gaze fixed on Kai with a complex blend of hope and concern. Thompson remained silent, his gaze traveling from Kai to the attentive faces in the gallery. He could sense the weight of their history, the burden of their expectations. He understood that this case transcended mere legal precedent. It touched the very spirit of Hawaii. "Mr. Ito," he finally spoke, his tone gentler now. "You've presented serious allegations. Allegations that strike at the heart of our legal foundations. You're asking this court to question the validity of land titles recognized for generations. That is a heavy mantle to wear, young man. Do you comprehend the implications of your request?" "I do, Your Honor," Kai responded, his voice unwavering. "And I believe it's a mantle worth bearing. Because the alternative, to perpetuate the injustices of the past, is a burden far heavier to endure." Thompson gave a slow nod, his expression pensive. His gaze flickered toward Ms. Evans, seated quietly at her table, her attention fixed on Kai with an air of quiet respect. He recalled Hiroshi, his mentor, who had always championed justice over the rigid application of the law. A case from years past resurfaced in his memory, a case where he had allowed himself to be swayed by appearances, by the heft of legal precedent, and had rendered a decision he had since regretted. The memory was a chilling ache in his gut, a constant reminder of the fallibility inherent in human judgment. He turned back to Kai, his eyes reflecting a newfound esteem. "Mr. Ito, you've provided this court with significant matters to contemplate. I commend your zeal, your erudition, and your devotion to your people. But the law is a formidable and often unforgiving mistress. You'll require more than ardor to prevail in this case. You'll need incontrovertible evidence. You will require legal acumen. And you'll require a strategy capable of withstanding the closest scrutiny of this court." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. "This court stands adjourned until Monday morning at 9 a.m. At that time, Mr. Ito, I expect you to present a comprehensive legal strategy outlining the means by which you intend to substantiate your claim. I suggest you employ this weekend to its fullest potential." As Thompson's gavel fell, the courtroom surged with activity. Lawyers began gathering their documents, observers exchanged hushed comments, and Kai remained still, his mind racing. He had secured some respite, but the true conflict was only beginning. He knew the odds were stacked against him, that he faced a steep ascent. But he knew equally that retreat was not an option. He had made a solemn vow to his ancestors, to his family, to his people. And he intended to fulfill it. A case from the past. "Mr. Ito," Judge Thompson's voice knifed through the hushed courtroom. "You contend that coercion and foreign influence nullified a land transfer seemingly legal under the Mahele. A considerable assertion. But can you substantiate this beyond broad accusations? Provide a concrete example, a ruling, where the courts of that era recognized such duress as grounds to invalidate a land agreement." Kai stood firm, his gaze unwavering as it met the judge's. No nervous tics, no hesitation marred his presence. He seemed to embody the collective spirit of his ancestors, the hopes of his community distilled into quiet resolve. "I can, Your Honor." A ripple of whispers swept through the gallery. At the opposing counsel's table, Mr. Davies visibly stiffened, a glint of disquiet in his eyes. He'd anticipated bombast, emotional appeals, perhaps a doomed attempt to introduce inadmissible evidence. This quiet confidence caught him off guard. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his initial skepticism momentarily in abeyance. "Indeed? To what case do you refer, Mr. Ito?" Kai inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the history he had so meticulously researched. "Kekuanawa vs. Bishop, 1864. The name lingered, foreign to most present. Beside Kai, Ms. Evans offered a subtle nod of encouragement. Judge Thompson's brows arched slightly. The name sparked a dim memory from the depths of his legal training. An obscure case, rarely cited, concerning what exactly? The specifics eluded him. His gaze flickered downward to his notes, a crease forming on his brow. "Proceed, Mr. Ito," he directed, his tone now tinged with cautious interest. Kai began. "In Kekuanawa vs. Bishop, Prince Moses Kekuanawa challenged a land transaction, claiming he'd been strong-armed into selling due to financial straits and the improper sway of foreign advisors. Though the court ultimately decided against Kekuanawa, citing insufficient evidence of coercion, the ruling was narrowly defined. The court explicitly allowed for the possibility that duress could invalidate a land sale, even one facially legitimate. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. More crucially, Your Honor, the court acknowledged the precarious position of many native Hawaiians at the time, grappling with economic hardship and the overwhelming influence of Western powers. While upholding the sanctity of contracts, the judges recognized the potential for abuse and exploitation. Kai's voice gained momentum. Kekuanawa establishes the willingness, at least in principle, of the kingdom's courts to entertain the argument of duress in land deals. It shows that those who framed the mahele were aware of the inherent power imbalance and the susceptibility of native Hawaiians to coercion. But the court ruled against Kekuanawa. Judge Thompson countered, his voice regaining its customary sharpness. How does that bolster your argument? It appears to weaken it. With deference, Your Honor, Kai responded. The ruling hinged on a lack of evidence, not a rejection of the principle of duress itself. My point is, the legal precedent was set, the door ajar. We intend to demonstrate that, unlike Kekuanawa, we do possess the evidence to substantiate the duress and undue influence that permeated land transactions during the mahele. He fixed Judge Thompson with a direct stare. Kekuanawa is not a victory, Your Honor, but a concession to the possibility of injustice, a possibility we intend to prove became a harsh reality in countless cases, including that of my family's land. The courtroom remained still, held captive by the clarity and reason of Kai's argument. Even Mr. Davies seemed taken aback, his earlier confidence replaced by a worried frown. Judge Thompson steepled his fingers, his eyes locked on Kai. He was undeniably impressed. He had anticipated a callow youth, relying on sentimentality. Instead, he faced a formidable adversary, equipped with a comprehensive grasp of history and a sharp legal mind. Mr. Ito, he said measuredly, your research is evident. However, Kekuanawa is over a century past. Legal precedent has altered considerably since then. Can you show how the principles established there retain relevance today? Kai nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The foundational principles of fairness and equity, of shielding vulnerable populations from exploitation, remain bedrock tenets of our legal system. While specific laws and interpretations may evolve, the commitment to justice must endure. He paused, then added, furthermore, Kekuanawa is not an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a broader legal narrative of that era, a recognition, however reluctant, of the potential for abuse woven into the rapid transformation of Hawaiian society. We intend to present evidence of this recurring pattern, demonstrating that the mahele, though nominally a legal process, often served as a tool to strip native Hawaiians of their ancestral lands. Judge Thompson leaned back, his expression unreadable. He was caught between his respect for the law and a burgeoning unease. His career was built on upholding the letter of the law, on strict adherence to precedent. But what if the law itself was tarnished, stained by historical inequity? The courtroom held its breath, awaiting Judge Thompson's response. The tension was palpable, almost solid. Mr. Davies, perceiving a chance to regain the advantage, rose smoothly. Your Honor, he said, his voice silken with condescension, while Mr. Ito's historical recital is engaging, it holds little sway over the current case. The land in question was acquired through a lawful transaction, properly recorded and documented. We have presented irrefutable evidence of ownership, and Mr. Ito has yet to provide any tangible counter-evidence. He turned to Kai, a patronizing smile playing on his lips. With all due respect, Mr. Ito, appeals to historical grievances are no substitute for legal proof. Kai met his gaze head-on. We will provide the proof, Mr. Davies. We will demonstrate that the transaction, while ostensibly legal, was corrupted by duress and undue influence. We will show that the historical grievances are not mere abstractions, but the very bedrock upon which our claim is built. Judge Thompson raised his hand, silencing Mr. Davies. Mr. Ito, I appreciate your zeal. However, I must reiterate that the burden of proof lies squarely with you. You must provide substantive evidence to support your claims. Emotional appeals and historical arguments alone will not suffice. He looked at Kai, his face softening almost imperceptibly. I understand the gravity of this case to you and your community. However, I cannot allow sentiment to sway my judgment. I must apply the law fairly and impartially, irrespective of the historical context. He paused, then added, I am willing to hear your evidence, Mr. Ito. I am willing to consider your arguments. However, I will not lower the bar. You must meet the legal threshold. Kai nodded, his resolve unwavering. We understand, Your Honor. We are prepared to meet that threshold. As Judge Thompson adjourned the proceedings, a low hum of chatter filled the courtroom. The atmosphere had undergone a transformation. Kai Ito was no longer perceived as a naive idealist chasing shadows. He was a force to be reckoned with, a formidable opponent armed with a profound understanding of the law and an unquenchable thirst for justice. Mr. Davies sought out Judge Thompson in his chambers later that evening. Robert, he began, using the judge's first name, a familiarity forged through years of professional association. I'm concerned about this Ito kid. He's stirring up hornets. This case could establish a perilous precedent. Judge Thompson sighed, massaging his temples. He has a point, David. That Kekuanau ruling, it's a house of cards. Precisely. We can't allow this Ito kid to rewrite history. These Hawaiians are just attempting to seize land that rightfully belongs to others. Davies spat, his voice laced with prejudice. Judge Thompson frowned. That's unfair, David. This is about more than real estate. It's about restorative justice, about redressing past wrongs. Justice? Robert, be realistic. This is about money, pure and simple. These Hawaiians want a handout. Judge Thompson rose, his voice gaining volume. That's enough, David. I won't condone that kind of bigotry in my chambers. This court will operate with integrity. I will hear both sides and render a decision based on the law and the evidence. He turned his back to Davies, effectively dismissing him. As Davies departed, muttering under his breath, Judge Thompson sank back into his chair, his thoughts troubled. He was haunted by a past case where prejudice had clouded his judgment, a mistake that had lingered like a specter. He gazed out at the cityscape, the lights shimmering on the dark waters of the harbor. He recognized this case was different. He couldn't allow past failures to dictate his present conduct. He had to be fair, impartial, and just. Even if it meant challenging the status quo, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable truths of the past. He thought of Kai Ito, his unwavering determination, his comprehensive knowledge of the law. He knew this case would be a trial, a long and arduous battle. But he was ready. He was ready to face the truth, however challenging it might be. The prodigy unveiled. Evelyn Evans, illuminated by the cold fluorescence of her office, fixed her gaze on the blinking cursor. The day's courtroom fracas echoed in her thoughts, a relentless chorus of legal jousting and suppressed animosity. Kai Ito. A name once relegated to a file, now thrummed with unexpected weight. Initially, she'd pegged him as a sincere, if overmatched, idealist charging at shadows. Now, doubt gnawed at that assessment. The Kekuanau versus Bishop citation, a daring gambit. Kai's seemingly spontaneous retrieval of that obscure precedent spoke volumes. It transcended mere factual recall. It demonstrated a comprehension of Hawaiian legal intricacies, a nuanced appreciation for the historical currents of coercion. Compelled to reconcile her initial judgment with the evidence before her, Evelyn dove into research. A cursory search yielded surprisingly little. A local high school alumnus, mentions in community newsletters concerning volunteer efforts. Nothing to suggest a legal savant. Frustration prickled her skin. There had to be more. Shifting tactics, she explored academic competitions, legal societies, anything hinting at dormant potential. Then she unearthed it. Tucked away in a university law journal, a concise report on the Pacific Rim mock trial competition. There, securing second place, Kamehameha High School, Kai Ito, lead counsel. Evelyn clicked, a nervous flutter in her chest. The photograph accompanying the article depicted a younger Kai, scarcely more than a boy, standing beside his teammates, a spark of self-assurance in his gaze. The piece extolled his exceptional cross-examination prowess and his uncanny knack for deconstructing intricate legal arguments. This was merely a prelude. Digging deeper, she uncovered a cascade of honors, debate triumphs, moot court victories, even a national accolade for legal writing. Each revelation eroded her initial perception, revealing a landscape of intellectual firepower she'd completely underestimated. One particular article caught her eye, a feature in a Honolulu paper, profiling Kai's prestigious scholarship to Stanford. The headline proclaimed, "Local boy makes good, Kai Ito, future of Hawaiian law?" The article portrayed a committed scholar, driven by a profound sense of communal duty and an ardent desire to safeguard his ancestral homeland. Evelyn scanned the article, absorbing testimonials from Kai's teachers and mentors. "His legal mind is unparalleled," one professor asserted. "He combines an innate understanding of jurisprudence with an unwavering dedication to justice." The piece also highlighted Kai's decision to defer his Stanford admission, remaining in Hawaii to care for his ailing grandfather, prioritizing filial duty over personal advancement. A selfless choice revealing the bedrock of his character. Leaning back, Evelyn felt a tempest of emotions roil within, chagrin at her initial miscalculation, astonishment at Kai's evident brilliance, and a burgeoning sense of anticipation. This wasn't merely a case. It was a chance to advocate for a remarkable individual and champion a cause resonating within her own moral compass. She dedicated the ensuing hours to meticulously assembling a detailed dossier on Kai Ito. She printed the articles, underscored pivotal passages, and scrawled annotations in the margins. By completion, she possessed a thorough profile of a legal prodigy, a young man poised to redefine the legal landscape of Hawaii. Silence blanketed the office, punctuated only by the computer's hum. Outside, city lights glittered against the black velvet of the night sky. Evelyn glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. She ought to leave, seek rest. But the image of Kai, standing before Judge Thompson, his voice resonating with conviction, held her captive. She needed to speak with him. She had to grasp his strategy, his vision for the case. And crucially, to offer her unwavering support. The following morning, Evelyn arrived at the courthouse before dawn, determined to intercept Kai before the day's proceedings. She found him seated on a bench outside the courtroom, absorbed in a massive legal treatise. He appeared weary, yet his eyes still flickered with the fierce resolve she'd witnessed. Approaching tentatively, unsure of his reaction, she said softly, "Mr. Ito?" Kai looked up, a guarded expression on his face. "Ms. Evans," he responded, his tone polite yet reserved. "I was hoping for a conversation," Evelyn ventured, gesturing to a nearby bench. "I've researched your background, and I'm profoundly impressed." Kai's eyes narrowed slightly. "The purpose? I underestimated you, Mr. Ito," Evelyn conceded, her voice sincere. "I made assumptions based on your age and, well, I was wrong. You possess legal acumen far exceeding your years. The Kekuanawa versus Bishop citation was inspired." A ghost of a smile touched Kai's lips. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. But compliments won't secure victory." "Agreed," Evelyn affirmed. "But a formidable legal team might. Mr. Ito, I offer my services. I want to co-counsel with you on this case." Kai regarded her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" he finally questioned. "Your skepticism was palpable yesterday. What prompted this?" "I saw your passion, Mr. Ito," Evelyn answered. "Your knowledge, your dedication to justice. And I realize this case transcends land ownership. It's about preserving a culture, defending a heritage, rectifying historical injustice. I want to participate." Kai remained silent, weighing her words, scrutinizing her face for insincerity. Then he spoke. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Evans. But I can't afford your counsel." Evelyn smiled. "Consider it pro bono. An investment in the future of Hawaiian law." Kai hesitated before extending his hand. "Then, Ms. Evans, I'd be honored." Evelyn gripped his hand firmly, a thrill surging through her. "Excellent. Let's begin. Detail everything: strategy, evidence, opposition. As Kai outlined his case, Evelyn listened intently, her mind racing with potential solutions. No longer merely an observer, she was a participant, a staunch advocate for a cause she embraced. And she sensed that, together, she and Kai Ito could achieve something extraordinary. The hearing commenced. Judge Thompson entered, his gaze sweeping across the chamber before resting on Kai. A flicker suggesting respect seemed to cross his features, a subtle nod to the young man's unexpected legal skill. Mr. Davies, in contrast, looked visibly rattled, having clearly underestimated Kai. He shot a disdainful glance at Evelyn, a silent acknowledgement of her affiliation with the enemy. The day's agenda centered on procedural matters, the admissibility of historical documents, and expert witness testimony. Mr. Davies attempted to discredit Kai's sources, claiming bias and unreliability. But Evelyn, armed with her newfound insight into Kai's abilities, stood ready to parry each thrust. She masterfully cross-examined Mr. Davies's witnesses, exposing inconsistencies in their accounts and underscoring the limits of their expertise. She presented compelling evidence supporting Kai's claims, drawing on her extensive research and understanding of Hawaiian jurisprudence. Judge Thompson observed with focused attention, his expression carefully neutral. But Evelyn detected a shift in his demeanor, a growing engagement with the proceedings. He posed incisive questions, challenging both sides to substantiate their arguments and provide tangible proof. During a recess, Evelyn approached Kai, concern etched on her face. "Mr. Ito," she said, "I'm troubled by Judge Thompson. He appears conflicted." Kai nodded. "I know. He's a just man, constrained by law. And the law isn't always synonymous with justice. Then we must reshape the law, Mr. Ito," Evelyn declared, her voice resolute. "We must demonstrate that justice demands a different outcome. We have to persuade Judge Thompson that this case transcends legal precedent, that it's about rectifying an injustice, fulfilling a promise, safeguarding a culture." Kai gazed at her, determination blazing in his eyes. "Then let's begin, Ms. Evans," he said. "Let's reveal the true meaning of justice." As the hearing resumed, Evelyn felt renewed resolve. The road ahead would be long and demanding, yet she had a potent ally in Kai Ito, a young man blessed with talent, passion, and unwavering commitment. She would stand by him, every step. Respect begins to bloom. The tap of Judge Thompson's pen punctuated the courtroom's stillness, each click a tiny hammer blow against the silence. His gaze remained fixed on the closed portal through which Kai Ito and Evelyn Evans had vanished. Above, the fluorescent bulbs buzzed, a mechanical drone that did little to quell the image of fervent debate still echoing in his mind. He gripped the pen tighter. Swallowing his pride always proved difficult. He'd been expecting something else entirely. A rambling presentation, a clumsy grasp of intricate legal arguments, perhaps even a melodramatic outburst or two. He had steeled himself for the tedium of dismantling a flawed case, brick by weary brick. Instead, Ito had delivered a sharp, impassioned dissection of his, Thompson's, long-held assumptions. The Mahele. A familiar historical footnote. Settled law, or so he had believed. He had never truly considered it through Ito's lens, a systematic dispossession disguised as progress. The young man, the advocate, had unearthed documents, treaties, arguments that resonated with uncomfortable truths. Thompson exhaled, the sound a leaden weight in the vacant space. He pivoted in his chair, the leather protesting beneath him. His gaze drifted to the portrait of Justice Brandeis, the jurist's painted eyes radiating wisdom and insight. Brandeis, champion of the underdog, bulwark against overreaching corporations. What judgment would he have rendered? He rose and moved to the window, surveying the Honolulu skyline. The sprawling cityscape, a concrete tapestry woven across what were once fertile lands and thriving aquaculture, stretched before him. A faint whisper of ancestral chants, the echoes of forgotten generations, seemed to rise on the tropical breeze. He possessed a reputation, carefully cultivated, for rigorous adherence to the law. Efficiency reigned supreme. He abhorred sentimentality, shunned emotional appeals. He had witnessed countless acts of courtroom theatrics, desperate pleas, sob stories designed to sway the jury. Impartiality was his armor, his ability to strip away the excess and expose the core. But Ito resonated differently. His eyes held a spark of raw intellect, a fierce dedication that struck a chord deep within Thompson. This wasn't about winning a case. It was about redressing an injustice, about reclaiming a birthright. He returned to his desk and retrieved the case file. Ito versus Davies. Trespassing. The charge seemed almost laughably inadequate now. He opened the file, re-examining Ito's initial submissions, seeking the fire he'd seen ignite in the courtroom. Where he had once perceived youthful idealism, he now discerned a meticulously crafted strategy, an artful deployment of legal precedents and historical evidence. He paused over a particular passage where Ito challenged the very definition of ownership, as it applied to Hawaiian land. Western concepts of private property, he argued, stood in stark opposition to the traditional Hawaiian understanding of aina, the land not as a commodity, but as a living entity, a source of sustenance and spiritual connection. Thompson frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. It was a powerful proposition, one that struck at the core of the legal system's foundations. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. This was no simple property dispute. It was a cultural collision, a reckoning with the past. Memories stirred. He had arrived in Hawaii after law school, lured by the promise of sun-kissed beaches and a less cutthroat professional environment. He soon discovered a complex reality beneath the idyllic surface, a web of historical wounds and ingrained inequalities. He had seen firsthand how the law, intended as an impartial arbiter, could be weaponized to perpetuate injustice. A long-ago case resurfaced, a zoning battle where a small family business was crushed by a powerful corporation. He had ruled in favor of the corporation, bound by precedent and regulation. He'd followed the letter of the law, but a persistent ache of regret lingered, a feeling of having failed to do what was right. The memory haunted him still, a shadow in his moral landscape. He closed the file and leaned back, his gaze lost on the ceiling. Ito had awakened something dormant within him, a buried sense of duty, a yearning for true justice. He was no longer merely evaluating a land claim. He was confronting his own history, granted a chance, perhaps, at redemption. He steepled his fingers before his lips, an unconscious gesture of deep contemplation. Caution was paramount. He couldn't allow personal feelings to sway his judgment. He had sworn to uphold the law, even when that law felt flawed. But what if the flaw wasn't merely a crack, but a foundational fault line? What if the very principles upon which the legal system was built rested on a bedrock of historical injustice? He stood abruptly and walked to the small refrigerator. He drew out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and drank deeply. The cool liquid soothed his parched throat, but did little to calm the tempest within. Returning to his desk, he sat heavily. He reopened the file, his eyes scanning the pages, seeking a way out of this ethical and legal labyrinth. He needed to find a precedent, a loophole, something to allow him to rule in Ito's favor without triggering a legal earthquake. He knew the path would be fraught with difficulty. Davies, with his phalanx of expensive lawyers, would fight him tooth and nail. But he could not, in good conscience, simply dismiss Ito's arguments. He owed it to himself, and to the people of Hawaii, to conduct a truly impartial inquiry. He thought of Evelyn Evans, the experienced attorney who had taken on Kai's case pro bono. Initially, he dismissed her as a sentimentalist, another liberal lawyer chasing a cause. But he had glimpsed the resolve in her eyes, heard the unwavering conviction in her voice. She was a formidable adversary, and he knew she would hold him accountable. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. He was caught. Ensnared between the dictates of the law and the demands of his conscience, between obligation and a profound desire to do right. When he opened his eyes, a newfound resolve burned in their depths. He would not allow fear or external pressures to dictate his decision. He would weigh the evidence, consider the arguments, and render a judgment based on the law, guided by his deepest sense of justice. He picked up his pen and began to annotate the file, his hand moving swiftly across the page. He was no longer simply a judge, he was a participant in a historical drama, a player in a game where the stakes soared far beyond the confines of the courtroom. The door to his chambers swung open, and Leilani, his clerk, entered. "Judge Thompson," she announced, "Mr. Davies's attorney is here, requesting an audience." Thompson looked up, his expression an inscrutable mask. "Inform him I will see him in 15 minutes. Leilani nodded and retreated. Thompson returned to the file, his pen hovering. A meeting awaited, a battle loomed. And for the first time in years, a spark of anticipation flickered within him, a sense of purpose reawakened. He was ready. Late that evening, Judge Thompson remained alone in his chambers, bathed in the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the Ito vs. Davies file. The city outside shimmered, a glittering testament to progress and modernization. But within these walls, the weight of history pressed down with palpable force. He reread Kai Ito's arguments, allowing the young man's words to resonate. He considered the saga of Hawaii, the burden of colonialism, the enduring pursuit of justice. He wrestled with his own role in this complex and often painful narrative. A subtle transformation occurred. His shoulders, previously hunched with tension, relaxed almost imperceptibly. The lines etched around his eyes appeared to soften. The ghost of a smile graced his lips. He closed the file and set it gently on the desk. Rising, he walked to the window, his gaze encompassing the city. He perceived it anew, not merely as an aggregation of structures and streets, but as a place infused with spirit, a place steeped in history, a place worth defending. He turned from the window and returned to his desk. He seated himself, his gaze locking onto the portrait of Justice Brandeis. He nodded slowly, as if agreeing with a silent directive. He reached for his pen and opened a fresh document on his computer. His fingers danced across the keyboard. He was no longer merely a judge, he was a scribe, a chronicler, a truth seeker. He was prepared to compose the next chapter of this case, a chapter that he hoped would be remembered not only for its legal implications, but for its relentless pursuit of equity. The next morning, on the bench, as Kai and Ms. Evans approached, Judge Thompson's gaze lingered on Kai a moment longer than necessary. Almost imperceptible, but a shift. The glint of steel had softened, replaced by something new, akin to respect. Small, yes? A seed barely pushing through the soil, but there. Respect had begun to sprout. The serpent scheme. Alistair Davies reclined in his bespoke suit, the edge of his leather briefcase pressing into his side. A slow, contemptuous smile touched his lips as he observed the ripples caused by Kai Ito, a young man whose absence today did little to diminish his presence in the courtroom. Judge Thompson, usually a stickler for the letter of the law, was actually entertaining Ito's arguments. The audacity of it. Davies had written Ito off as a callow nuisance, a flash in the pan. But the persistent resonance of the younger man's words, combined with Thompson's shifting stance, now stirred a disquieting chill within him. He adjusted himself, the subtle fragrance of his cologne, sandalwood underscored with amber, briefly punctuating the air. Harrington and Croft, his firm, represented the Ka-Napoli Development Corporation, intent on erecting a luxury resort on the very land Ito claimed as ancestral heritage. As lead counsel, Davies' assent to partnership hinged on the project's success. Ito, with his impassioned rhetoric and infuriatingly thorough research, posed a palpable threat to everything he had striven for. Steepling his fingers, his gaze sharpened as Ms. Evans addressed the court. He conceded her competence. She was methodical, precise, dedicated. Yet, she remained merely a proxy, a mouthpiece for Ito's agenda. It was his unconventional legal interpretations, his profound grasp of Hawaiian lore, that had truly unsettled Thompson. A jolt of irritation coursed through Davies. He had devoted years to perfecting his legal acumen, navigating the complexities of corporate law, climbing the professional ladder. Ito, barely out of adolescence, had strolled into the arena armed with little more than archaic texts and unwavering conviction, threatening to dismantle all that Davies had built. The effrontery was staggering. He scanned the courtroom, noting the hushed expectancy. The audience, A tapestry of journalists, law students, and concerned residents hung on Ms. Evans's every syllable. He detected their sympathy, their silent endorsement of Ito's cause, a dangerous swell that threatened to sway both public sentiment and the judge's deliberation. Davies's mind, a finely tuned instrument of calculation, accelerated. Ito had to be neutralized, discredited, exposed as a charlatan. He couldn't allow this interloper to jeopardize his ambitions. A snippet of conversation overheard weeks ago in the courthouse cafeteria surfaced in his memory, a whisper about Ito's past, some minor youthful transgression. He had dismissed it then as irrelevant drivel. Now, it sparked a nascent strategy, a flicker of possibility in the gloom of his mounting unease. He retrieved his phone, ostensibly to review his schedule, but in truth to discreetly locate the contact details of a private investigator he occasionally employed for sensitive matters. Vargas. Discreet. Efficient. Unscrupulous. He found the number, his thumb hovering over the call icon. He understood that he was venturing into ethically murky territory, potentially even crossing legal boundaries. But the stakes demanded it. Failure was not an option. With a suppressed sigh, he tapped the button. Vargas. A voice, rough as gravel, answered. Davies here, he murmured, his tone measured and controlled. I have a new assignment. He outlined his requirements, employing careful ambiguity, avoiding any explicit directives that might implicate him. He wanted Vargas to unearth anything detrimental in Ito's history, anything that could be leveraged to undermine his standing. Understood, Vargas replied, his voice devoid of inflection. I'll begin immediately. Davies terminated the call, a steely resolution hardening his features. The gears had been set in motion. Now, he could only wait. His attention returned to the proceedings, his eyes narrowing as he watched Ms. Evans conclude her summation. Capable, yes, but no match for him. He possessed the resources, the network, the unwavering determination to prevail. He leaned forward, a predatory glint in his eyes. He was the dominant force, and he would not permit a mere novice to pilfer his prize. Later that evening, within the lavish confines of his office overlooking Honolulu's glittering skyline, Davies swirled a measure of amber whiskey, the ice chiming softly against the crystal. The day's events played back in his mind, each detail dissected, each potential vulnerability assessed. He'd passed the afternoon scrutinizing the Ka Napoli Development Corporation's files, searching for loopholes Ito might exploit. He discovered none. The agreements were impenetrable, the permissions correctly acquired. Everything was in complete order. Nonetheless, he wrestled with the notion that Ito represented an erratic factor, an unforeseen variable capable of derailing his meticulous designs. He needed to be nullified. He placed the glass down, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent space. He must adopt a more proactive, confrontational approach. Relegating responsibility to Vargas was insufficient. He needed to seize command. He opened his laptop and commenced researching Ito's lineage, his background, his affiliations. He sifted through articles, profiles on social media, anything that might grant him an advantage. He discovered that Ito's grandfather had been a respected kupuna, a Hawaiian elder revered for his knowledge of traditional land tenure. He had been a vocal opponent of the Mahele, the 1848 decree that had radically transformed land ownership in Hawaii, facilitating foreign control. Davies smirked. Ito's campaign was rooted in more than just land. It was about inheritance, about redressing a perceived historical wrong. This was an opening he could exploit. He began composing a memo outlining a plan to depict Ito as a dangerous radical, an extremist seeking to destabilize the existing framework. He would portray him as a threat to Hawaii's economic well-being, a misguided visionary prepared to sacrifice progress for personal gain. He recognized the venture as a long shot, but it was worth the attempt. He must exert every effort to safeguard his interests, to secure his future. As he typed, his phone vibrated. It was Vargas. He answered immediately. "What have you uncovered?" "I found something," Vargas murmured, his voice low and confidential. "Potentially very valuable." Davies settled back in his chair, a smile blossoming across his face. The serpent's plot was starting to solidify. Tomorrow in court promised to be most interesting. Whispers of doubt. The midday sun hammered down, etching stark shadows across the courthouse lawn. Judge Thompson, battling a rising tide of anxiety, sought refuge in a brief recess. The heavy air, perfumed with plumeria and tainted by exhaust, offered little respite. He needed to disentangle himself from the web of legal maneuvering, especially Ito's. While undeniably charismatic, the young man's fervor felt meticulously crafted. Too flawless by half. He gravitated towards a secluded bench sheltered by a colossal banyan, its descending tendrils forming a natural alcove. Unbuttoning his collar, the starched fabric felt suddenly constricting. The Ka Napoli Development Corporation case had become a far thornier issue than anticipated. Initially a straightforward trespass, a trivial matter for dismissal, it had transmuted into a historical inquest, a challenge to established property lines, and a media circus. Davies, as predictably slick as polished ebony, materialized beside him. "Judge Thompson," he murmured, his baritone barely audible above the street noise. "May I?" Thompson suppressed a sigh. Davies possessed an uncanny knack for appearing at the least opportune times. "Please, Mr. Davies." Davies took a seat, maintaining a polite distance. A carefully calibrated, almost commiserating smile played on his lips. "This Ito, quite the firebrand, wouldn't you agree?" Thompson grunted, offering nothing. He preferred to avoid engagement, yet Davies's presence radiated a sense of purpose. This was no idle chat. "His arguments possess a certain allure," Davies conceded, his tone deliberate. "But one can't help but question the wellspring of such zeal. His sudden devotion to Hawaiian heritage." Thompson's brow furrowed. "Are you implying something, Mr. Davies?" Davies raised a placating hand. "Not implying, Judge. Simply observing. I've taken the liberty of investigating Mr. Ito, much as he's scrutinized my clients." He paused, letting the insinuation linger. "His background might prove enlightening." Irritation pricked at Thompson's skin. He loathed these veiled barbs. He had witnessed this tactic countless times from the bench. Still, a seed of doubt, once sown, rarely failed to sprout. He prided himself on impartiality, on piercing the courtroom haze, yet he wasn't impervious to subtle manipulation. "Define run-in with the law, Mr. Davies," Thompson requested, his tone measured. Davies shrugged, affecting nonchalance. "Oh, nothing egregious. Petty theft, I believe. A youthful transgression. But it does present a somewhat divergent portrait from the selfless champion he projects, doesn't it?" Thompson remained silent, his gaze absorbed by the dappled sunlight filtering through the banyan's canopy. He resisted the urge to believe Davies, to dismiss it as a cynical smear campaign. But the nagging doubt persisted. Was Ito genuine, or simply playing a part? His thoughts veered to a past case that had continued to haunt him, a situation where outward appearances had compromised his judgment, where he had condemned a young man on flimsy evidence. A painful lesson learned about the perils of prejudice and the necessity of thoroughness. "I will investigate, Mr. Davies," Thompson stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "But I assure you, my judgment will be based on facts, not insinuation." Davies flashed a thin, predatory smile. "Naturally, Judge. I wouldn't presume otherwise. Just a matter of due diligence." He departed, leaving Thompson alone to grapple with his unease. The sun felt oppressive, the air stifling. The knot in his stomach cinched tighter. He disliked Davies, mistrusted him, yet he couldn't dismiss the possibility of a kernel of truth within his claims. He rose, overwhelmed by the courthouse's stifling atmosphere, needing clarity, to think. He headed toward the parking lot, his mind reeling. He had to uncover the truth about Ito. He had to determine if he was being played. Pulling away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The courthouse loomed in the distance, a concrete and glass monolith. It seemed to oppress, a symbol of law, justice, and the perpetual struggle to distinguish truth from falsehood. He questioned his readiness for the task. He wondered if he could withstand the insidious whispers of doubt. Later, in his study, Judge Thompson nursed a scotch, the glass stewing on the mahogany desk. The room exuded the comforting aroma of aged books and pipe tobacco, a refuge from the courtroom's turmoil. He had spent hours immersing himself in legal documents, trying to lose himself in property law. But his thoughts returned to Kai Ito, Davies's veiled accusations, and the old case that refused to fade. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed. He needed to consult a trusted confidant, someone capable of offering unbiased insight. "Margaret?" he inquired after the call connected. "It's Robert." Margaret, a retired judge and longtime friend, had seen it all. A sharp, pragmatic woman with unwavering principles and a strong commitment to justice. He valued her counsel, her ability to strip away pretense and reach the core. He recounted the Kai Napoli Development Corporation case, Kai Ito, and Davies's insidious suggestions. He laid bare his anxieties, his uncertainties, his fear of repeating past errors. Margaret listened with patience, offering neither censure nor interruption. After he concluded, she remained silent for a long moment. "Robert," she stated finally, her voice even and firm. "You know the course you must chart. Pursue the evidence, wherever it may lead. Exercise fairness, impartiality, and justice. Don't allow prejudice or fear to cloud your judgment. Rely on your instincts, but remain willing to scrutinize them." He sighed. "It's rarely that simple, Margaret." "Indeed," she concurred. "But that's why you wear the robe, Robert. Because you possess the capacity to navigate difficult choices, to weigh conflicting narratives, to unearth the truth. Investigate Davies's insinuations by all means, but don't let them define your perception of Ito. Recall that everyone deserves a fair hearing, irrespective of their history." He expressed his gratitude, feeling a fraction of the burden dissipate. He knew she was correct. He must trust his instincts, but remain open to examining them. He had to follow the evidence, wherever it pointed. He hung up, taking a long sip of his scotch. He still harbored concerns, still wrestled with uncertainties, but he felt a renewed sense of resolve. He would delve into this matter. He would discover the truth about Kai Ito. And he would render the right verdict, even if it proved the most arduous. The truth, he understood, often lay concealed beneath layers of duplicity and self-serving agendas. His duty was to excavate it. And he would allow nothing, nor anyone, to impede him. A loaded question. The courtroom air, already taut with anticipation, seemed to congeal as Judge Thompson angled forward. All morning, a disquiet had gnawed at him, Davies' whispers about Ito's history reverberating like a sour note. He wrestled with the injustice of letting Davies poison his view, yet doubt, once sown, stubbornly took root. He needed verification, a test of character. Kai stood firm at the plaintiff's table, his youthful features set in a mask of serene assurance. He had just concluded his summary of the tangled history of Big Island land rights, a tale embroidered with royal edicts, missionary influence, and the gradual attrition of native claims. Evelyn Evans, his co-counsel, offered a subtle, encouraging nod, a silent endorsement of his meticulous preparation. Thompson cleared his throat, the sound booming through the amplifier. "Mr. Ito," he began, his tone carefully measured, "you've painted a vivid picture of the historical wrongs endured by your ancestors. You've argued with considerable force for the restoration of what was unjustly seized." Kai gave a respectful nod. "I have, Your Honor." "And you maintain," Thompson pressed, pausing for dramatic effect, "that these long-ago injustices justify a reassessment of established property lines, even those sanctified by decades, even generations?" "Unquestionably, Your Honor. Boundaries forged through deceit and coercion possess no enduring legitimacy." Kai's voice rang out, resolute and clear. Thompson tented his fingers, his gaze unwavering on Kai. "But is it not also a fact, Mr. Ito, that your own family has reaped benefits from land acquisitions that, while perhaps not directly implicated in the original dispossession, occurred within that same turbulent era? Acquisitions made by your grandfather, to be precise, through channels that, perhaps invite scrutiny?" The pointed question hung heavy in the atmosphere, a sudden shadow eclipsing the brightness of Kai's presentation. The courtroom held its collective breath, the staccato rhythm of the court reporter's keyboard abruptly silenced. Across the room, Davies allowed himself the barest suggestion of a smile, a subtle compression of the lips that hinted at his self-satisfaction. Kai visibly stiffened. His hard-won composure wavered, a fleeting crack in the facade. A wave of emotion, surprise, offense, a sense of betrayal, flickered across his face before he regained control. His complexion paled slightly. "Your Honor," Evans interjected, her voice a honed blade. "Objection. This line of inquiry is immaterial and prejudicial. It serves only to denigrate the plaintiff's character and divert attention from the crux of the matter." Thompson ignored the objection, caught in the current of his own questioning, compelled by a need to reconcile the image of Kai he had formed with the dubious portrait painted by Davies. "Mr. Ito, the question stands. Did your grandfather acquire land during that period, and were the methods he employed entirely unimpeachable?" Kai drew a steadying breath, his eyes locking onto Thompson's. The initial shock had hardened into firm resolve. "My grandfather did acquire land, yes. He was a farmer, a man of relentless industry who sought to secure his family's future. The land was purchased, not plundered. Was the system equitable? Certainly not. Did it favor those with connections and wealth? Without question. But to imply that he engaged in the same type of systematic exploitation my ancestors suffered is deeply insulting, Your Honor." The reply was measured, yet the underlying pain was unmistakable. Thompson experienced a sharp stab of conscience, a haunting echo of a past misjudgment where he had allowed prejudice to dictate his verdict. He'd condemned a young man based on conjecture and the whispers of a biased community, a decision that continued to plague him. "Mr. Ito," Thompson said, moderating his tone, "I am not implying, only inquiring. This case pivots on historical context, and a complete understanding of that context, including the subtleties and complexities of land ownership during that time, is paramount." "The core complexity, Your Honor," Kai retorted, his voice regaining strength, "is that the entire structure was stacked against native Hawaiians. My grandfather navigated that system as best he could, yet he never disavowed his heritage, nor did he cease advocating for the rights of his people. He instilled that same sense of responsibility in me." Evelyn Evans placed a hand on Kai's arm, a wordless gesture of solidarity. "Your Honor, with respect, this line of questioning is not only irrelevant but dangerously inflammatory. It invites a fishing expedition designed to unearth baseless accusations and obscure the fundamental issue, the illegal confiscation of my client's ancestral homeland." Thompson weighed her words, the responsibility of his position a palpable burden. He had permitted Davies' narrative to sway him, to cast doubt on Kai's motivations and rectitude based on flimsy conjecture. He had teetered on the precipice of bias, of judging a young man according to his ethnicity and presumed advantage. He glanced at Davies, who watched the exchange with a self-satisfied smirk. A sudden realization jolted Thompson. Davies sought not justice, but victory, and he was prepared to deploy any tactic, including exploiting racial sensitivities and launching personal attacks, to achieve it. Thompson straightened, his gaze hardening. "Ms. Evans, objection sustained. Mr. Davies, I suggest you confine your interrogation to the pertinent facts of this case. I will not permit this courtroom to become a stage for character assassination or unsupported claims." Davies's grin vanished, replaced by a mask of thinly veiled resentment. "Your Honor, I believe it is my professional obligation to investigate every avenue to arrive at the truth. The plaintiff's background is intrinsically linked to his intentions and his assertions." "Your obligation, Mr. Davies," Thompson countered, his voice now edged with steel, "is to present evidence, not insinuation. I have yet to see any indication that Mr. Ito's motivations deviate from what he has articulated, to safeguard his family's heritage and seek redress for past injustices. Produce such evidence if it exists. Otherwise, I suggest you proceed." The courtroom atmosphere crackled with renewed tension. The spectators, previously murmuring, now hushed, sensing the shift in the judicial winds. Thompson had reclaimed control, drawing a firm line. He turned back to Kai, his expression tinged with contrition. Mr. Ito, I apologize if my questioning caused you any discomfort. My intention was not to defame your character or doubt your motives. I merely sought to ensure a thorough exploration of this complex matter. Kai nodded slowly, his eyes still guarded, but his bearing more relaxed. Thank you, Your Honor. I understand. Thompson directed his attention to Evelyn Evans. Ms. Evans, you may continue your presentation. Evelyn Evans rose, her composure unruffled. Thank you, Your Honor. We would like to call our next witness, Dr. Leilani Akana, a professor of Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii. As Dr. Akana took the stand, Thompson leaned back, his mind churning. He had narrowly avoided a grievous error in judgment, a mistake that could have had devastating consequences for both Kai and the integrity of the court. He had almost allowed Davy's prejudice to taint his own perception, to view Kai not as a champion of justice but as a potential adversary. He understood now that he must remain ever vigilant, to resist snap judgments and to adhere to facts, not insinuations. He needed to function as a judge, not an inquisitor, and to ensure that justice prevailed, irrespective of the race, age, or lineage of those involved. The trial was far from resolved, and he knew Davies would not concede easily. But Thompson was steadfast in his determination to remain impartial, to listen fully, and to render a verdict based solely on evidence and law, uncolored by prejudice or personal bias. He owed it to Kai, to himself, and to the memory of the young man he had wronged so many years ago. The ghost of that past case served as a constant reminder of the value of fairness, and the danger of allowing bias to cloud objectivity. It was a heavy burden, yet one he would bear, a guiding star in the murky depths of this complex and emotionally charged case. The loaded question had detonated, revealing not Kai's supposed deceit, but Thompson's own susceptibility to manipulation. He wouldn't repeat that mistake. Deflecting the trap. For a moment, Kai was paralyzed. The question lingered, a miasma of suspicion and bigotry, suffocating him. His heart thrummed a frantic tattoo against his ribs in the sudden, charged silence. He felt the collective gaze, some curious, others expectant, and too many laced with barely disguised disdain. Davy's self-satisfied grin was a serpent poised to strike. This was the snare. He recognized its carefully wrought construction now, a testament to Davy's desperation. Thompson had been the lure, and Kai, the intended prey. The inquiry wasn't about property lines, it was about him. About his standing, his history, his very legitimacy to challenge the status quo. He willed himself to inhale, the air a dry scrape in his throat. He needed clarity, an escape from this maze of conjecture and veiled attacks. A glance at Evelyn revealed a serene mask, yet in her eyes, a silent promise of solidarity. A flicker of understanding passed between them, a shared determination. He exhaled slowly, the rigid set of his shoulders softening. He could navigate this. He had to. Your Honor, Kai began, his voice even, the tremor that had threatened to betray him now banished. With deference, I submit that the line of questioning drifts into areas unrelated to the present case. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom, a low tide of speculation. Davy's smirk faltered, replaced by a fleeting annoyance. Thompson reclined in his chair, his expression in enigma, though his eyes gleamed with increased intensity. Irrelevant, Mr. Ito? Thompson's tone was deceptively gentle. I merely inquired about your family's connection to this land, a lineage you claim is ancestral. Surely, substantiating that connection is paramount. Kai conceded with a nod, while refusing to yield the field. Undoubtedly, Your Honor. We are prepared to furnish that connection through documented evidence, ancestral narratives, and expert analysis. However, the specific nature of my great-grandfather's difficulties bear little relevance to the validity of our claim under Hawaiian law. The essence is not whether my great-grandfather erred, but whether the subsequent land conveyance was just and lawful. He paused, allowing his words to resonate, then continued, his tone gaining strength, fueled by quiet conviction. To dwell on historical imperfections is to divert from the central issue, the enduring legacy of injustice inflicted upon the Hawaiian people, perpetuated today through dubious land acquisitions and the displacement of indigenous families. Davies shifted uncomfortably, a tick appearing in his jaw. His carefully orchestrated plan was starting to unravel. Kai was formidable. Too formidable. "Are you suggesting, Mr. Ito," Thompson countered, his tone sharpening, "that the past holds no consequence? That we disregard the deeds of our predecessors?" Kai met the judge's gaze squarely. "Not at all, Your Honor. The past informs the present, shapes our understanding of right and wrong. But it should not serve as a bludgeon to inflict further injury. We must glean wisdom from the past, not remain captive to it." He drew another breath, bracing himself to deliver the pivotal element of his strategy, the gambit he hoped would shift the momentum. "Your Honor, the posed question, while seemingly benign, raises a crucial point regarding the burden of proof in cases concerning historical land disputes. Are we to presume that anyone contesting a land title must first establish the unblemished virtue of their forebears? That any prior failing, however trivial, negates their pursuit of justice?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. The tension was a palpable force, anticipation mounting. This was the crux. "If that becomes the benchmark, Your Honor," Kai pressed on, his voice imbued with quiet certainty, "then I must respectfully inquire, what measure of flawless moral rectitude was applied to those who initially obtained this land, frequently through methods that were morally questionable? What scrutiny was given to their actions, their motivations, their adherence to the law, or the lack thereof, at the time?" He turned his gaze directly to Judge Thompson, unwavering. "If we are to delve into history, Your Honor, let us proceed exhaustively and equitably. Let us scrutinize the actions of all participants, not solely those who now seek to reclaim what was unjustly seized. Let us consider the historical context, the power structures, the systemic biases that influenced those events." He paused, letting the silence amplify his message. He had redirected the challenge, compelling Thompson to apply equal rigor to the opposing side, to examine the genesis of the land claims now under defense. The courtroom was hushed, save for the faint drone of the ventilation system. Every eye was riveted on Judge Thompson, awaiting his response. Davies' face was a mask of simmering rage, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing. Thompson remained still, his gaze fixed upon Kai, his expression inscrutable. He steepled his fingers, a customary gesture when lost in contemplation. The silence stretched, each second an eternity. Kai held his breath, waiting, hoping his calculated risk had succeeded. He had trod a delicate line, challenging the judge's authority, yet he had done so with courtesy, with logic, and with the profound belief that he championed something greater than himself. At last, Thompson broke the silence, clearing his throat, the sound amplified in the stillness. "Mr. Ito," he stated, his voice measured and deliberate, "your argument is persuasive." A collective intake of breaths swept through the room. Evelyn squeezed Kai's hand, a silent expression of relief and admiration. Davies slumped back, deflated. Thompson continued, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "This court has no interest in engaging in character assassination. Our task is to determine the validity of the land claim based on applicable laws and historical evidence. The focus will remain on the legitimacy of the land transfer, not on the personal weaknesses, real or imagined, of individuals who may or may not be directly involved." He turned back to Kai. "Mr. Ito, you may proceed with your presentation. Please emphasize the documents and testimonies that directly support your claim of ancestral ties to the land and the alleged improprieties in its transfer. Let's adhere to the verifiable." Kai nodded, a surge of relief coursing through him. He had succeeded. He had evaded the trap, turned the tide, and reasserted the emphasis on fundamental justice. He caught Evelyn's eye, offering a grateful smile. He couldn't have managed without her support. He inhaled deeply, ready to proceed, ready to advocate for his family, for his legacy, for the future of his people. He understood the battle was far from concluded, but he had secured a pivotal victory. And he was prepared for the next exchange. Davies, however, was unwilling to concede defeat. He leaned towards his associate, whispering fiercely, his gaze darting towards Kai. This isn't finished. We'll unearth something. Everyone harbors secrets. Dig deeper. I want every detail on this Ito kid and his family. Everything. And I want it now. Truth revealed. Your Honor, Davies began, his voice a syrupy drawl laced with disdain. It has become painfully clear that Mr. Ito's relationship with the truth is malleable. A young man so driven by ambition, he seems willing to sculpt reality to fit his narrative. A glint of triumph sparked as he shot a look at Kai. Before delving further, it's essential we examine certain discrepancies in his personal history. Kai met the challenge in Davies's eyes, his own a mask of composure. He'd anticipated this low blow. A desperate animal, cornered, always bites. Judge Thompson tilted back in his leather chair, his gaze a weary pendulum swinging between the two men. He sighed inwardly. The day felt like a marathon already, and he'd hoped for a swift resolution to this phase. Mr. Davies, I trust you're prepared to offer more than conjecture? I have little patience for fishing expeditions. A razor's edge sharpened his tone. His desire to conclude this grew more intense. Davies' feigned wounded innocence was almost comical. Of course, Your Honor. I would never trifle with the court's time. However, I've received disquieting reports regarding Mr. Ito's scholastic record and purported civic engagement. Information which, I believe, casts a long shadow over his claims of representing his family and the community's best interests. A cold dread coiled in Kai's gut. Davies's influence was far-reaching. He'd likely dredged up every youthful misstep, every trivial infraction, ready to parade them like trophies. This wasn't about fact-finding. It was a calculated character assassination. He steeled himself. Before Davies could elaborate, Evelyn Evans rose. Her movements, economical and precise, radiated a quiet force. Sunlight, fractured by the high windows, painted fleeting sparks of resolve in her gaze. Your Honor, she stated, her voice a steady beacon cutting through the courtroom's simmering tension. I object to this line of inquiry. It bears no relevance to the matter at hand, the legitimacy of land claims rooted in established precedent. Mr. Davies seeks only to besmirch Mr. Ito's reputation, offering no tangible connection to the case itself. This is a blatant attempt at misdirection, a smoke screen to obscure the actual issues. Davies scoffed, a dismissive sound. With respect, Ms. Evans, a person's fundamental character speaks to their believability. We are contesting the veracity of Mr. Ito's testimony, and his background holds undeniable relevance. Judge Thompson exhaled heavily, the sound amplified in the hushed chamber. Ms. Evans, your objection is noted. However, Mr. Davies raises a valid point. Credibility is paramount. I will permit him to proceed, but I expect a direct correlation to the central issues of this case. Another irrelevant remark, Mr. Davies, and I will find you in contempt. Is that understood? Davies nodded, a glint of triumph flickering in his eyes. Perfectly, Your Honor. He swiveled back to Kai, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. Mr. Ito, isn't it true that you faced suspension from your university for academic dishonesty? Kai's spirit plummeted. He'd buried that incident deep. A misunderstanding, truly, but one that had left an indelible mark. The weight of every eye in the room pressed upon him. He clenched his hands, determined not to betray a flicker of vulnerability. Before Kai could formulate a response, Ms. Evans interjected, her voice resonating with unwavering belief. Your Honor, with your leave, I would like to submit evidence pertaining to Mr. Ito's character and accomplishments that I believe is highly pertinent to these proceedings. Judge Thompson arched an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his weariness. Proceed, Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans moved to the evidence table and retrieved a neatly stacked pile of documents. She approached the judge's bench, presenting the files. Your Honor, these papers furnish a comprehensive overview of Mr. Ito's academic and professional life. They encompass letters of recommendation from distinguished professors, records detailing scholarships and awards he has received, and proof of his extensive involvement in serving the community. Thompson perused the material, his initial skepticism gradually yielding to surprise. He found letters extolling Kai's sharp intellect, his dedication, and his unwavering commitment to the good of his community. Scholarships awarded for academic prowess and leadership materialized. He observed a history replete with varied community projects, from ecological preservation to the safeguarding of cultural traditions. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ms. Evans continued, addressing the court, Mr. Ito did face a brief suspension during his time at university. However, this stemmed from a misunderstanding concerning a collaborative project. The matter was thoroughly investigated, and Mr. Ito was fully exonerated. The university has since issued a formal apology and acknowledged his academic standing. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the implications sank in. Davies' smugness evaporated, replaced by disbelief that swiftly morphed into simmering rage. Ms. Evans turned her gaze toward Davies, her words laced with pointed accusation. Mr. Davies, it appears your disquieting reports were either profoundly inaccurate or deliberately misleading. Perhaps you should exercise greater caution when selecting your sources, particularly when attempting to malign a young man who has dedicated himself to public service. Davies sputtered, his face flushing crimson. This is outrageous. Ms. Evans is attempting to sway the court with fabricated evidence. Fabricated evidence? Ms. Evans countered, her tone dripping with irony. These are official records from respected institutions, Mr. Davies. Perhaps you should present your disquieting reports for examination of their authenticity. Davies remained silent, his jaw muscles working furiously. He felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He had underestimated Ms. Evans, and more critically, he misjudged Kai. Ms. Evans then presented yet another document to the judge. Your Honor, this is a copy of an email originating from Mr. Davies' office directed to a university administrator. The email solicits any and all negative information regarding Mr. Ito, irrespective of its relevance to the present case. It also contains a veiled threat of potential legal action should the administrator fail to comply. A collective gasp resonated through the courtroom. Judge Thompson's eyes widened as he absorbed the contents of the email. His face darkened with barely suppressed anger. He fixed Davies with a look of utter disapproval. Mr. Davies? Judge Thompson uttered, his voice a low thrum of controlled fury. Is this email authentic? Davies shifted uncomfortably under the judge's piercing scrutiny. He was trapped. Denial was futile. Your Honor, he stammered. I can explain. I seriously doubt that. Judge Thompson snapped. This represents a blatant attempt to intimidate and manipulate a witness. It is unethical, unprofessional, and utterly reprehensible. I am profoundly dismayed by your behavior, Mr. Davies. He paused, inhaling deeply to regain his composure. I am giving serious consideration to imposing sanctions against you, Mr. Davies. However, I will reserve my judgment until I have had the opportunity to fully examine this matter. In the meantime, I suggest you refrain from any further attempts to tarnish Mr. Ito's reputation. Your energy should be directed toward the merits of your client's argument, not on personal vendettas. Davies slumped back, defeated and humiliated. His meticulously crafted facade had shattered, revealing the tawdry machinations beneath. He'd become so consumed with discrediting Kai that he'd lost sight of the true objective, the pursuit of justice. Judge Thompson turned his attention back to Kai, his expression softening ever so slightly. He saw a young man wrongly targeted, a young man who had stood firm in the face of adversity. He saw a young man who deserved respect. Mr. Ito, Judge Thompson said, I apologize for the unjustified scrutiny you have endured. I assure you that this court will not tolerate such tactics. You have demonstrated remarkable poise and integrity throughout this ordeal. I commend you for your fortitude. Kai nodded, a faint smile gracing his lips. A cleansing wave of relief washed over him. He had weathered the storm, and he had emerged stronger. He'd met Davies' assault head-on and emerged unscathed. He sought out Ms. Evans's gaze, his heart overflowing with gratitude. She had been his shield, his advocate, his unwavering champion. He knew he couldn't have done it alone. Ms. Evans returned his look, a warm smile illuminating her face. She had believed in him implicitly, and she never questioned his ability to triumph. She understood this was but one skirmish in a protracted struggle, but she remained confident in their ultimate victory. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, signaling the resumption of the proceedings. "Now," he said, his voice regaining its customary authority, "let us refocus on the matter at hand, the legitimacy of the land claims. Mr. Davies, I trust you possess some substantive evidence to present, or are we destined to continue this parade of distractions?" Davies, still reeling from the judge's excoriation, mumbled a feeble apology. He recognized the precariousness of his position. He'd forfeited credibility, and he'd lost the judge's esteem. He would have to proceed with extreme caution if he hoped to salvage his client's case. As the hearing resumed, Kai felt a surge of renewed resolve. He had faced Davies's worst, and he had survived. He was prepared to fight for his family's land, for his community's legacy, for justice itself. He knew the path ahead would be demanding, but he was undeterred. He possessed truth as his ally, and he had the unshakable support of Ms. Evans. He was ready to win. Apologies and dismissals. A silence, thick and cloying, saturated the courtroom, an oppressive blanket woven with anticipation. The air conditioner's drone, usually unnoticed, now felt like a brazen intrusion. Judge Thompson, his face a road map of regret underscored by a flicker of mortification, tented his fingers, a futile attempt to conceal the tremor that betrayed him. He cleared his throat, the amplified sound snapping through the tension, and fixed his gaze on Kai. "Mr. Ito," he stated, his tone unusually somber. "An apology is due." Kai, who had stood rigidly composed through the debacle of Davies's character assassination attempt, subtly shifted. He'd anticipated vindication, but not a public mea culpa from the bench itself. His expression remained neutral, dark eyes unwavering on the judge. "My initial assessment of your background," Thompson amended, carefully selecting his words, "stemmed from incomplete data and, frankly, a bias I deeply regret. I allowed Mr. Davies's insinuations to corrupt my impartiality. That was an error. A grave one." He paused, his gaze locking with Kai's. The gravity of his confession seemed to solidify in the room, a palpable weight. "I should have recognized the profundity of your legal acumen, the scrupulous nature of your research, and the fervent dedication you bring to this matter. I failed to do so, and for that, I offer my sincere apologies." The apology, albeit stilted, resonated with honesty. Kai detected it in the slight slump of Thompson's shoulders, in the raw vulnerability momentarily exposed in eyes usually masked by judicial steel. He offered a slow nod, a silent acceptance. "Thank you, Your Honor," Kai responded, his voice clear and strong. "Your candor is appreciated." Thompson then redirected his attention toward Davies, seated at his table, his features a rigid tableau of suppressed fury. His complexion, once ruddy, had paled, leaving him looking fragile and depleted. "Mr. Davies," Thompson began, his voice hardening, the repentance now replaced by a cutting edge of censure. "Your conduct during these proceedings has been deplorable. The attempt to introduce irrelevant and unfounded allegations regarding Mr. Ito's past is not merely unprofessional. It constitutes a flagrant attempt to mislead this court and prejudice these proceedings." Davies began to object, but Thompson silenced him with a raised hand. "Furthermore," he pressed on, his volume increasing slightly, "the evidence tendered by Ms. Evans concerning your inquiries into Mr. Ito's academic history suggests a level of unethical conduct that is profoundly disturbing. I trust the bar will address this matter appropriately." Davies's face twisted with unchecked rage. "Your Honor, with all due respect," he stammered, "I was merely endeavoring to ascertain the veracity of Mr. Ito's claims. He presents himself as an expert, and it is my obligation to confirm the legitimacy of his expertise." "Your obligation, Mr. Davies," Thompson countered, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is to construct a cogent legal argument grounded in demonstrable facts and evidence, not to resort to character assassination and exploratory mudslinging. You have failed spectacularly in that obligation. This court will not countenance such tactics." He leaned forward, his gaze drilling into Davies. "Let there be no ambiguity. Any further attempts to introduce extraneous or prejudicial material into these proceedings will be met with the full severity of the court's sanctions. Is that understood?" Defeated and humiliated, Davies mumbled a reluctant, "Yes, Your Honor." Thompson straightened, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "The allegations leveled by Mr. Davies concerning Mr. Ito's academic record are hereby dismissed with prejudice. They bear no relevance to the matter before the court, and will not be considered in any capacity." He paused, inhaling deeply. The oppressive tension in the room gradually dissipated, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. This court remains dedicated to ensuring a just and impartial hearing for all parties involved. Thompson reiterated, his voice regaining its customary authority. "We shall proceed with the examination of the land claim based solely on the evidence presented and in accordance with established law. Let us hope that we can proceed from this point based on the merits of the case." With that, he brought down his gavel, the sharp crack reverberating throughout the chamber. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. As the courtroom emptied, Kai approached Evelyn. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said, extending his hand. "I truly value your assistance back there." Evelyn smiled, grasping his hand firmly. "You're welcome, Kai. Davies's behavior was completely unacceptable. I'm glad I could help set things straight. Even so, I don't quite understand why he'd resort to such extremes." Evelyn sighed, a sound tinged with weary understanding. "Because you represent a threat, Kai. You're young, bright, and fiercely committed to your beliefs. That makes you a dangerous obstacle in his view." "Dangerous?" Kai offered a mirthless chuckle. "I'm simply trying to safeguard my family's heritage. And that land signifies far more than mere acreage to Davies and his patrons." Evelyn explained, her voice hushed. "It symbolizes influence, wealth, and dominion. They won't relinquish it willingly." Kai's expression hardened into resolve. "Then we'll simply have to intensify our fight." Meanwhile, Davies remained isolated at his table, his face burning with shame and indignation. He clenched his fists, knuckles bone-white against the polished wood. He had miscalculated Kai Ito. He had misjudged the judge. He had underestimated Evelyn Evans. And now, he was facing the consequences. He retrieved his phone and dialed a number. "I need to meet with you," he commanded, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "Immediately." He terminated the call and slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing starkly in the deserted courtroom. This was far from over. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Later that evening, Judge Thompson sat alone in his chambers, contemplating the glittering panorama of the Honolulu skyline. The city lights twinkled like scattered jewels, a radiant tapestry of ambition and desire. He swirled the golden liquor in his glass, the eyes chiming softly against the delicate crystal. He had erred today. Severely. He had permitted his own preconceived notions and biases to color his judgment, nearly undermining a case that was clearly about more than property. It was about justice, about history, about the inherent rights of a population that had been marginalized and overlooked for too long. He took a measured sip of his drink, the whiskey tracing a warm path down his throat. His thoughts drifted to Kai Ito, to the burning conviction in his eyes, to his unwavering dedication to his cause. He had witnessed that kind of fervent commitment before, in the faces of idealistic youths who believed they could reshape the world. Too often, they had been ground down by the weight of reality, their aspirations dashed against the impervious wall of power and corruption. He wondered if Kai would suffer a similar fate. He hoped not. He hoped that Kai possessed the strength and resilience to withstand the forces aligned against him. He hoped that he, Judge Robert Thompson, could provide an equitable and unbiased forum for Kai to present his case. His mind strayed to the case that continued to haunt him, the one where he had delivered the wrong verdict, the one that had deprived an innocent man of his liberty. It had occurred years ago, but the memory still lingered, a persistent reminder of his own imperfect nature. He had been younger then, more self-assured, more convinced of his own infallibility. He had learned a brutal lesson that day, one he had carried with him ever since. He drained his glass and placed it on his desk with a sigh. He bore a responsibility to these people, to Kaido, to the truth itself. He would not allow his prejudices or his past mistakes to cloud his judgment again. He would listen intently, he would weigh the evidence carefully, and he would exert every effort to ensure that justice prevailed. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights. The wind rustled through the palm trees outside, a whispering echo of the island's complex and vibrant history. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a silent promise. He would not fail them again. The ultimate conundrum. The air in the courtroom felt leaden, each breath a conscious effort. Sunlight sliced through the high windows, revealing dust motes suspended in a silent ballet. Judge Thompson, features sculpted into an impassive mask, tented his fingers. Offering that apology to Kai had been a necessary, if personally humiliating, act of contrition. Yet, the core issue remained, a complex entanglement of past wrongs and present-day legal constraints. He needed assurance, beyond any lingering doubt, that Kai possessed not just legal acumen, but true comprehension of its underlying principles. Mr. Ito. Judge Thompson began, his voice now a deep, resonant baritone, devoid of the previous edge yet still commanding total attention. We have partaken in a singular exercise. A variation on truth or dare, perhaps. Its purpose, however, was not mere amusement. It served to gauge your command of the law, and your capacity to wield it with both rigor and ethical fortitude. He paused, his gaze traversing the room. He noted anticipation, skepticism, and in Evelyn Evans's expression, a quiet, unwavering faith. He pointedly avoided eye contact with Davies, imagining the man stewing, already plotting his next maneuver. Therefore, the judge resumed, turning back to Kai. We arrive at the ultimate test. This isn't a question easily dispatched. It demands a synthesis of all we've discussed, a navigation through the treacherous currents where legal precedent clashes head-on with justice itself. Consider it, if you will, a microcosm of the very dilemma at the heart of this case. Kai stood firm, shoulders squared, his gaze direct. He had weathered the storm of Davies' accusations, the sting of the judge's initial mistrust. He felt the phantom weight of generations, the land's very essence, pressing upon him. But he also drew strength from Ms. Evans's steadfast support, the unspoken encouragement emanating from the gallery, from those who believed in his promise. I'm ready, Your Honor. Kai responded, his voice clear and unwavering. Judge Thompson leaned back, his expression enigmatic. Imagine, he began, his voice softening to a near murmur, drawing everyone into the hypothetical scenario. A secluded island within the Hawaiian chain. A flourishing community, sustained by the land for countless generations, living in accordance with the ancient Ahupue system. They possess no formal titles, no written records recognized by Western legal structures. Their claim rests entirely on unbroken occupancy and ancestral knowledge. He paused, allowing the mental landscape to form. Then, during the latter part of the 19th century, a prosperous American businessman appears. He recognizes the island's potential for sugarcane cultivation. He exploits his considerable influence, taking advantage of ambiguities within existing land regulations, laws designed, let us be frank, to favor those of his ilk. He secures a deed to the entire island, effectively dispossessing the native population. A low hum swept through the courtroom. Everyone present grasped the historical echoes, the enduring ramifications of such injustice. Now, Judge Thompson continued, his voice gaining volume, leap forward to the present day. The businessman's heirs control the island. They have invested substantially in resort development, generating employment and contributing to the regional economy. The indigenous community, now scattered and largely marginalized, retains only fragmented memories of their homeland. They lack any concrete legal documentation to substantiate their historical claim. He fixed Kai with a penetrating look. The community initiates legal action, seeking to reclaim their ancestral lands. They contend that the original acquisition was fundamentally fraudulent, a violation of their inherent rights. The defendant, the businessman's descendants, counter that they possess a legally sound title, have invested in the island in good faith, and that any attempt to invalidate their claim would inflict devastating economic repercussions. The judge leaned forward, his tone shifting to a conversational cadence, yet still resonant with authority. Here lies the problem, Mr. Ito. Current legislation favors the defense. The deed appears legitimate. The statute of limitations has long since expired. The burden of proof rests squarely upon the plaintiffs, the native community. He paused, allowing the weight of the legal obstacles to permeate the room. However, he added, a glint of something akin to eagerness in his eyes, evidence exists, albeit circumstantial, pointing to the original act of fraud. Testimonials from elders recounting the businessman's deceitful practices. Historical documents hinting at collusion with corrupt officials. Cultural practices providing evidence of uninterrupted occupancy spanning centuries. Judge Thompson inhaled deeply. The question, Mr. Ito, distills to this: as legal counsel for the native community, how do you advocate for justice when faced with seemingly insurmountable legal barriers? How do you strike a balance between upholding the established law and addressing a historical wrong? How do you reconcile the imperatives of economic progress with the rights of a community rendered voiceless? And perhaps above all, how do you convince a court to look beyond the cold, unyielding letter of the law and acknowledge the profound injustice festering at the core of this situation? The ensuing quiet was palpable. All eyes in the room were trained on Kai, awaiting his response. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. This marked the pivotal moment. Kai briefly closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts. He conjured an image of the island, its verdant landscape, its shimmering waters, the faces of his ancestors. He felt the weight of their aspirations, their dreams, their sacrifices. He understood that his answer would not only dictate the fate of this hypothetical scenario, but would also reveal his understanding of true justice. He opened his eyes, his gaze now clear and resolute. Your Honor, he began, his voice imbued with conviction. The law is not a rigid construct. It is a dynamic instrument, one that must adapt to meet the evolving needs of society. While the legal hurdles in this case appear formidable, they are not, in my opinion, insurmountable. He paused, inhaling deeply. My approach would be multifaceted. Firstly, I would contest the validity of the original conveyance. While seemingly legitimate on its face, I would assert that it was procured through nefarious means, a breach of the fiduciary responsibility owed to the native community. I would offer evidence of the businessman's duplicity, his collaboration with venal officials, and his calculated exploitation of loopholes. I would contend that, as a result, the deed is void ab initio, legally invalid from its inception. He continued, his voice gathering momentum. Secondly, I would invoke the principle of delayed discovery. While the statute of limitations may technically have elapsed, I would maintain that the native community could not have reasonably uncovered the fraud until relatively recently. Knowledge of the deceit was deliberately suppressed, obscured by layers of legal complexity and skewed historical narratives. Only now, with the emergence of hitherto unseen evidence and a growing awareness of past injustices, has the truth begun to surface. Kai subtly adjusted his posture, his eyes now gleaming with fervency. Thirdly, I would appeal to the court's inherent powers of equity. Even if the strictly legal arguments fall short of complete persuasiveness, I would submit that the court bears a moral obligation to rectify a historical wrong. The dispossession of the native community was a profound injustice, a violation of their fundamental human rights. The court possesses both the authority, and indeed the responsibility, to redress that injustice, even if it necessitates a nuanced interpretation of existing legal precedents. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Fourthly, I would underscore the profound cultural significance of the land. This transcends a mere property dispute. It is a question of cultural preservation. The land is inextricably woven into the fabric of the native community's identity, their history, their traditions. Its loss would constitute a devastating blow, a form of cultural erasure. Kai shifted his gaze towards the gallery, towards the supportive faces that had gathered. Finally, he stated, his voice resonating with emotion, I would appeal to the collective conscience of our community. I would remind everyone that we are all interconnected, that our destinies are intertwined. We cannot forge a just and equitable society upon a foundation of historical oppression. We must acknowledge the sins of the past and collaborate to build a brighter future for all. He returned his attention to Judge Thompson, his eyes shining with unwavering conviction. Your Honor, he concluded, this is not simply a legal contest. It constitutes a moral imperative. It is a struggle for justice, for equality, for the safeguarding of a cultural heritage. And I firmly believe that, armed with the appropriate evidence and persuasive arguments, we shall ultimately prevail. A prolonged silence filled the chamber. Judge Thompson scrutinized Kai, his expression inscrutable. He saw not merely a young man, but a force to be reckoned with, a guardian of justice. He discerned a reflection of his own youthful idealism, the lawyer who once believed in the power of the law to effect tangible change. He cleared his throat, dispelling the quiet. That was a comprehensive and compelling exposition, Mr. Ito. He commented, his voice tinged with an undeniable hint of admiration. You have evidently devoted considerable thought to this matter. Judge Thompson settled back in his chair, deliberating his next words. He had presented the ultimate conundrum, and Kai had responded with remarkable insight, ardor, and eloquence. However, the exercise was far from concluded. The true confrontation was only just commencing. Davies, who had been seething in his seat throughout Kai's presentation, finally exploded. Objection, Your Honor! He barked, his face reddened with barely contained rage. This entire charade is a mockery. Mr. Ito is merely regurgitating a pre-scripted monologue. He has demonstrated no genuine understanding of the law whatsoever. Judge Thompson turned his gaze to Davies, his expression hardening perceptibly. Mr. Davies, he stated, his voice edged with steel, I will not countenance further interruptions. Mr. Ito has articulated a well-supported and compelling argument. Whether it was pre-prepared or not is quite beside the point. What matters is that it clearly demonstrates a grasp of the intricate legal and ethical dilemmas inherent in this case. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Furthermore, Mr. Davies, I feel obliged to remind you that this entire scenario was initiated at your instigation. You sought to undermine Mr. Ito's credibility and cast doubt upon his competence. Instead, you have merely succeeded in showcasing his intelligence and his unwavering commitment to his client's cause. Davies sputtered, his face deepening to an even more alarming shade of crimson. He opened his mouth to voice a protest, but Judge Thompson cut him off sharply. Silence, Mr. Davies, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for dissent. I have heard enough. This court stands adjourned. Judge Thompson rose from his seat and strode purposefully from the courtroom, leaving Davies fuming silently and Kai standing tall, a beacon of hope amidst adversity. As Kai gathered his belongings, Ms. Evans approached him, her face lit by a warm smile. That was nothing short of brilliant, Kai, she complimented, her voice laced with pride. You navigated that hypothetical scenario with remarkable skill and finesse. Kai returned her smile, deeply grateful for her unwavering support. Thank you, Ms. Evans, he replied. I couldn't have done it without you. He understood that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Davies would not concede easily. However, he felt prepared for the struggle. He had the law on his side, the support of his community, and an unshakable faith in the power of justice. He would not rest until the land was returned to its rightful custodians. Outside the courtroom, the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the Honolulu skyline. Kai inhaled deeply of the balmy, tropical air, feeling a renewed sense of purpose surging through him. The fight for justice was far from over, but he was resolute in his commitment. He would neither retreat nor surrender. He would continue the struggle until justice was served. A brilliant solution. A suffocating stillness blanketed the courtroom, every gaze laser-focused on Kai. Judge Thompson, framed by the leather of his towering chair, shattered the quiet with a curt, Mr. Ito? Eloquence alone won't sway this court. Spare us the theatrics. We require substance, precedent and viable remedies. His voice, edged with steel, brooked no further delay. Kai drew a measured breath, the accumulated burden of generations, the fervent hopes of his people, a tangible weight on his shoulders. He fought to quell the flush creeping up his neck, refusing to yield to intimidation, to let Davy's sneering presence, or the judge's initial frostiness, divert him. Duty propelled him. For a fleeting instant he closed his eyes, summoning the visages of his forebears, grounding himself in the remembered feel of the earth, the soughing whispers of island winds. He sought clarity, inspiration, a pathway forward. Opening his eyes, he met the judge's scrutiny head-on. "Your Honor," he began, his tone firm and unwavering. "The challenge before us is undeniable. The historical narrative is intricate, and the existing legal framework appears to favor the current landowners. However, adherence to the letter of the law," he paused, letting the sentiment resonate, "does not invariably equate to equitable outcomes." Davies emitted a derisive snort, earning a swift reprimand from the bench. Undeterred, Kai pressed on. "The deficiency lies not in the law itself, Your Honor, but in its interpretation within this particular context, its neglect of fundamental fairness. We stand here contesting the appropriation of lands, often achieved through duress and cunning, from a people who had nurtured and dwelt upon it for countless years." He gestured towards the gallery, a sea of anxious, hopeful faces. "These are not merely abstract legal arguments, Your Honor. These are individuals whose very identity, whose cultural survival and economic security, are inextricably linked to this land." He paused, allowing his words to find purchase. A subtle shift rippled through the room. The judge's brow, once creased with impatience, now hinted at burgeoning interest. Even Davy seemed less assured, his customary smirk replaced by a fleeting flicker of unease. "The established recourse," Kai explained, "would involve disputing the original land grants, asserting their illicit or unethical procurement. Yet, as previously stated, that avenue is fraught with obstacles. Evidence is often fragmentary or tainted, and legal precedent is heavily weighted against us." He inhaled deeply, bracing himself. The pivotal moment had arrived. "Therefore," he declared, conviction ringing in his voice, "I propose a novel strategy. A solution that respects the existing legal structure while simultaneously redressing the historical wrongs." He advanced, placing a meticulously crafted document before the clerk. "Your Honor, I have prepared a proposal for a land restoration and reconciliation trust. This trust would be sustained, in part, by a percentage of the profits derived from the contested lands. The resulting funds would then bolster educational initiatives, cultural preservation endeavors, and economic empowerment schemes within the Hawaiian community." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. An unexpected gambit. Not a simple reclamation demand, but a more refined, considered approach. Anticipating the inevitable questions, Kai continued, "The trust would be overseen by a board comprising representatives from the Hawaiian community, the landowners, and impartial third parties. This ensures transparency and accountability, preventing misuse and fostering collaboration across all vested interests." He locked eyes with Judge Thompson. "This is not about exacting retribution, Your Honor. It is about pursuing reconciliation. It is about identifying a path to acknowledge the past while forging a more just future. It is about establishing a system that benefits all, not merely a privileged few." Turning his attention to Davies, his expression hardening, he stated, "Mr. Davies, your clients have reaped significant rewards from these lands for generations. Surely, they can afford to allocate a modest portion of their wealth to the community whose heritage was sacrificed to enable that prosperity." Davies sputtered, his face mottling with crimson. "This is preposterous. You suggest we simply surrender our rightfully earned assets to the rightful custodians of the land." Kai finished, his voice even but resolute. "It's not a donation, Mr. Davies, but an investment. An investment in the future of Hawaii, in the perpetuation of its cultural identity, and in the healing of deep-seated wounds." He turned back to Judge Thompson. "Your Honor, this proposal is not without its imperfections. It demands compromise and cooperation from all participants. However, I submit that it represents the most viable course. A course that honors the law while concurrently upholding the tenets of justice and equity. Silence descended once more, now imbued with a sense of solemn awe and profound reflection. Even Judge Thompson appeared to struggle for words. Ms. Evans, who had watched with quiet intensity, rose. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and resolute, "I wholeheartedly endorse Mr. Ito's proposal. I find it to be a display of extraordinary ingenuity and foresight. It confronts the core issues at hand while simultaneously offering a practical and enduring resolution." She turned to Davies, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Davies, I implore you to give this proposal due consideration. Prolonging this conflict through further litigation will only exacerbate divisions and animosity. This is an opportunity to bridge divides, to foster trust, and to cultivate a better tomorrow for everyone." Davies remained mute, his face a mask of frustrated fury. The narrative was slipping from his grasp. He had underestimated his opponent, this local boy who dared to challenge his dominance. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, piercing the tension. "Mr. Davies," he said in a measured tone, "do you have any immediate objections to this proposition?" Davies hesitated, glancing about the courtroom as if searching for an exit. He knew that outright rejection would be met with widespread condemnation. He needed to stall, to reassess, to devise a strategy to undermine this audacious plan. "Your Honor," he conceded finally, his voice taut, "while I acknowledge the novelty of Mr. Ito's proposal, I harbor grave reservations concerning its practicality and legality. I require time to examine the particulars and confer with my clients before rendering a definitive response." Judge Thompson nodded slowly. "Very well, Mr. Davies. I shall grant you 1 week to review the proposal and submit your written response to the court. In the interim," he turned to Kai, a glimmer of something akin to respect in his eyes, "Mr. Ito, I commend you on your resourcefulness. You have presented a compelling case, one that demands serious deliberation." He paused, a hint of a smile gracing his lips. Court adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Kai felt a wave of weariness crash over him. He had invested everything, pouring his soul into his presentation. The future remained uncertain, but he knew he had done all within his power to champion his people. Ms. Evans approached, her eyes gleaming with pride. "That was masterful, Kai," she said, extending her hand. "Absolutely masterful. You wrong-footed them completely." Kai smiled, returning her warm handshake. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. I couldn't have achieved it without your invaluable support." He looked towards the gallery, where his loved ones awaited him. Their faces shone with hope and appreciation. The struggle was far from concluded, but for now, they had cause for celebration. A reason to believe that justice, even against formidable odds, remained attainable. He walked towards them, a quiet determination settling within his soul. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but he was prepared. He had found a brilliant solution, and he would fight with unwavering resolve to see it through. The ancestors were watching, their legacy his guiding star. Applause in recess. A silence, absolute and weighty, filled the courtroom's void for a suspended moment. Then the dam burst. A subterranean hum swelled into a roaring wave of sound. Spectators abandoned decorum, rising not in the expected, measured manner, but in a spontaneous eruption of raw emotion. Tentative clapping sparked, catching flame, then exploding into a deafening ovation. Hawaiian voices rang out, cries of support unintelligible to Judge Thompson yet vibrant with fervor. At the storm's epicenter stood Kai, his breath a steady anchor. A subtle dip of his head, almost unseen, acknowledged the torrent without a hint of conceit, his gaze moving across the gallery. He found his family, pride blazing in their eyes, and his community, renewed hope etched on their faces. The applause transcended him. It was a tribute to ancestors, generations battling for their ancestral grounds, the burgeoning dawn of a future where their heritage would not be extinguished. It was a collective catharsis, a defiant bellow against inequity. Ms. Evans, her hand a light presence on his arm, squeezed gently, a silent endorsement of his victory. In her eyes, admiration mingled with a palpable sense of relief. She had placed her faith in him, even when doubt had cast long shadows. The reverberations of his words now brought a surge of profound hope. Even Davies seemed momentarily staggered. The color had leached from his face, leaving a ghastly, ashen cast. He remained frozen, his knuckles gleaming bone-white as he gripped the chair's edges. He'd miscalculated, dismissing Kai as a wide-eyed dreamer. He now faced the full force of that idealism, the galvanizing power of a united people. Judge Thompson remained seated, his features an inscrutable mask. His gavel rested mutely on the bench. He absorbed the unfolding scene, struggling to reconcile himself to the paradigm shift he had just witnessed. The courtroom thrummed with an almost tangible energy. The confluence of history's burden, past injustices, and the potential for redemption pressed down with undeniable weight. He presided over countless cases, beheld both grand theatrics and profound grief. Yet, this felt fundamentally different. It was not merely legal wrangling, but a cultural collision, a confrontation with history, a glimpse into a future he hadn't dared to contemplate. He had entered expecting a mundane procedure, a rote matter of property rights. He had perceived Kai Ito as a naive young man, outmatched by the law's intricacies. Impatience flared at his youth, his seeming inexperience. Now, he was compelled to confront his own preconceived notions, his own limitations. The applause surged, relentless. Judge Thompson felt an odd confluence of unease and veneration. He longed to restore order, to reclaim command of his court. Yet he also recognized the magnitude of the moment, the raw emotion fueling the outburst. To suppress it would be to repudiate the very essence of justice. He regarded Kai anew, not as an impudent upstart, but as an elemental force. He saw the countless hours of study, the unwavering dedication, the deep-seated conviction that had propelled him here. He glimpsed the potential for true leadership, the power to inspire and unite. A memory surfaced unbidden, a past case decided too hastily, where expediency had triumphed over fairness. That memory was a persistent wound, a perpetual testament to his own imperfection. The weight of that burden felt heavier now than ever. He cleared his throat, the sound swallowed by the din. He reached for his gavel, then hesitated. To bring it down now would feel like a profound act of betrayal, a rejection of the very values he swore to uphold. His hand retreated, his gaze locked on Kai. He required time to internalize this, to fully grasp the implications of what had been spoken. He needed to reevaluate his assumptions, to interrogate his biases. He needed to determine if he was willing to become part of the solution, or merely remain an impediment to justice. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "The court will stand in recess." The words resonated, a stark contrast to the previous uproar. The applause slackened, dissipating into a subdued murmur of anticipation. People settled back, their focus laser-locked on Judge Thompson, awaiting his next move. He rose from the bench, his movements considered, his expression still an enigma. He turned and walked towards his chambers, his robes billowing around him. He did not look back. As the door clicked shut, the courtroom vibrated with renewed conjecture. What would the judge decide? Would he embrace Kai's proposition, or summarily reject it? Would he acknowledge the historical wrongs, or cling stubbornly to the established order? Ms. Evans turned to Kai, concern etching lines around her eyes. "That was remarkable, Kai. But I can't decipher him. What's your read?" Kai drew a deep breath, striving to calm his racing pulse. "I don't know, Ms. Evans. But I think he's listening. For the first time, he's truly listening." Davies remained immobile, his face a rigid mask of rage and frustration. He knew he needed to respond swiftly, to regain command of the situation. He grabbed his phone and began furiously typing, his mind scrambling to formulate a counterattack. In the gallery, Kai's family embraced, their faces alight with hope. They had arrived with low expectations, bracing for another setback. Now, they allowed themselves to believe that something had shifted, that their voices had finally been heard. The recess stretched, each minute an eternity. Tension thickened in the courtroom air, almost palpable. The destiny of Kai Ito's land, the future of his community, hung precariously in the balance. Within his chambers, Judge Thompson paced, his thoughts a whirlwind. He revisited Kai's arguments, dissecting each point, scrutinizing every nuance. He consulted law books, seeking precedents, seeking counsel. But the answers he sought were not to be found in musty tomes. They resided within his own conscience, his own sense of moral imperative. He gazed out the window, at the bustling cityscape below. He saw the towering skyscrapers, emblems of advancement and prosperity. But he also perceived the looming shadows of the past, the history of exploitation and colonialism that had shaped this terrain. He contemplated his own legacy, the imprint he would leave on the world. Would he be remembered as a bulwark of the status quo, a custodian of privilege? Or would he be immortalized as a champion of justice, a voice for the marginalized? The answer, he understood, lay in his judgment in this case. He settled at his desk, inhaled deeply, and picked up his pen. It was time to write. It was time to decide. It was time to choose between legal precedent and moral rectitude. And for the first time in memory, he was unsure which direction his pen would take. An offer of mentorship. The courtroom buzz hadn't quite subsided as Evelyn Evans threaded her way to Kai, now encircled by well-wishers. A palpable anxiety still clung to the air despite the celebratory atmosphere, a mingling of optimism and lingering trepidation visible on uplifted faces. She caught Kai's eye, offering a restrained yet proud smile. He mirrored it, his features alight with a blend of fatigue and hard-won victory. "That was remarkable, Kai," she managed, her voice nearly swallowed by the surrounding clamor. "Truly remarkable." He raked a hand through his already unruly hair. "Thanks, Ms. Evans. I just needed to say it. All of it. You did far more than speak," she countered softly. "You unearthed a buried history, a truth kept hidden too long. You argued with the authority of someone who embodies the law, not simply recites it." The press of the crowd intensified, forcing them closer. Kai gestured toward a quieter alcove near the water fountain. "Let's find some breathing room before the judge returns." They navigated the throng, the low hum of conversation trailing them like a persistent undertow. Reaching the haven of the corner, Evelyn leaned against the wall's cool marble. "You know," she mused, her gaze contemplative. "After 15 years in practice, I've witnessed countless courtroom displays, ingenious strategies aplenty. But what you accomplished in there, it resonated differently. It was visceral, unvarnished, and undeniably impactful." Kai fidgeted, color rising in his cheeks once more. "I simply laid out the facts, Ms. Evans. The truth as it is. Truth can be a potent instrument, Kai. But its effectiveness relies on skillful, precise application. You possess both." She paused, her eyes searching his. "Have you given thought to what comes next, once this wraps up?" He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I haven't really looked beyond this. My focus has been solely on this case, on saving our land." "Understandably so," she responded gently. "But you possess a rare talent, Kai. It would be a disservice to see it squandered." She straightened, adopting a more professional demeanor. "Kai, I'd like to propose an internship at my firm." Her words hung between them, the courtroom's drone receding into a background murmur. Kai stared, his expression reflecting a potent mix of disbelief and stunned appreciation. "An internship?" he echoed, barely a whisper. "With you?" "Yes," she affirmed, a genuine smile blossoming on her face. "I run a small practice, concentrating on environmental and indigenous rights law. We could greatly benefit from someone with your fervor, your knowledge base, and your singular perspective." Speechless for a moment, Kai had envisioned numerous outcomes to the trial, many potential futures, but this opportunity surpassed his boldest imaginings. "Ms. Evans, words fail me," he stammered, sincerity washing over him. "I'm deeply honored. But I lack a law degree. I'm just a kid, really." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Don't undervalue yourself, Kai. You may lack the formal certification, but you possess the intellect, the passion, the very soul of a lawyer. Frankly," she added, her voice lowering conspiratorially, "you've already demonstrated more legal insight than some freshly minted graduates I've encountered." She leaned closer. "Look, this isn't a simple handout. It would entail strenuous work, demanding hours, intricate cases, a steep learning curve. But I believe in you, Kai. I believe you have the capacity to become an exceptional lawyer, someone who can truly shape events." He glanced down at his hands, opening and closing them rhythmically. The proposition was enticing, intensely so. An avenue to pursue his passion, refine his skills, champion the causes closest to his heart. Yet, it also presented a formidable challenge. He was young, without experience, and still bearing the crushing weight of the land dispute. "I appreciate the gesture beyond measure, Ms. Evans," he finally said, his voice strengthening. "But I'm unsure if I'm equipped. This trial, it's all-consuming. I don't know if I could manage anything else right now." "I completely understand," she replied, her tone immediately gentler. "This is a lot to absorb. The offer is open, Kai. Regardless of the resolution of the land issue, regardless of the trial's duration. Take your time, consider it carefully. And once you're prepared, let me know." She paused, adding with a playful wink, "Besides, I suspect you'll be fully occupied simply navigating Judge Thompson's forthcoming rulings." Kai managed a wan smile. "You're likely correct on that." The sharp clang of the gavel reverberated through the courtroom, announcing the end of the recess. The murmur of voices swelled again as the crowd began filtering back to their seats. "Well, that's our signal," Evelyn stated, straightening. "Ready for round 2? Kai drew a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be." They retraced their steps toward the courtroom's center, the unspoken offer of an internship floating between them. Approaching the table, Mr. Davies cast them a look of barely veiled disdain. Kai met his gaze unflinchingly, refusing intimidation. He detected a subtle shift in Mr. Davies's expression. A fleeting hint of something akin to concern flickered in his eyes. Could Kai's impassioned plea have genuinely unsettled the man, even on a minor scale? Judge Thompson re-entered, his face unreadable. He settled into his seat, his gaze sweeping across the room. Silence descended, every eye locked on him. "All right," he announced, his voice sharp and efficient. "Let's resume. Mr. Ito, you may continue presenting your case." Kai nodded, stepping forward. He glanced at Ms. Evans, who offered a small, encouraging smile. Taking another deep breath, he began to speak, his voice ringing out clearly and strongly. He launched back into his presentation of the evidence, systematically dismantling Mr. Davies's arguments and illuminating the historical injustices inflicted upon his family and community. As he spoke, he found his thoughts drifting back to Ms. Evans's offer. An internship, a dream within reach, an opportunity to apply his abilities to the pursuit of justice. But first, victory in this case was crucial. He must secure his family's land. He must prove that fairness could triumph, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. A surge of resolve pulsed through him. He would allow nothing to distract him. He would not be deterred by Mr. Davies's tactics. He would not be disheartened by Judge Thompson's potential biases. He would fight for his land, for his family, for his community, with every ounce of strength and intellect he could muster. And when the battle concluded, regardless of the outcome, he would carefully weigh Ms. Evans's offer. Because perhaps, just perhaps, this marked the genesis of something truly transformative. Throughout the remaining afternoon hours, Kai persevered with his presentation. He summoned witnesses, introduced documents, and argued with unwavering tenacity. He noted that Judge Thompson, while still maintaining a facade of neutrality, appeared to be listening with increased focus, his brow furrowed in contemplation. Even Mr. Davies seemed less assured, his earlier arrogance replaced by a careful wariness. He objected frequently, hoping to interrupt Kai's momentum, but Kai deftly deflected each challenge, citing legal precedents and historical data to fortify his assertions. As the day waned, Kai felt the trial's cumulative strain weighing him down. He was drained, both physically and emotionally. Yet, simultaneously, he was filled with a profound sense of purpose, a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. Judge Thompson announced the court's adjournment until the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, Kai remained at the table, gathering his papers and notes. Ms. Evans approached, her eyes mirroring her admiration. "You were extraordinary today, Kai," she said softly. "Absolutely extraordinary." He offered a weary smile. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. But it's not concluded yet." "No, it's not," she agreed. "But you've planted a seed, Kai. A seed of doubt, a seed of hope. And that's a potent force." She paused, adding gently, "Get some rest. You'll need it for tomorrow." He nodded, gathering his belongings. As he exited the courtroom, he glanced back at Ms. Evans. She watched him, her expression one of steadfast support. He understood that, whatever the future held, he was not alone in this struggle. And that realization, more than any other, fueled his resolve to persevere. A path chosen. The combined aromas of time-worn paper and citrusy cleaner permeated Ms. Evans's office, a far cry from the invigorating chill Kai had left at the doorstep. Sunlight poured through the expansive window, illuminating a ballet of dust motes and accentuating the genuine warmth that shone in her eyes as she waited for his answer. Kai shifted slightly in the supple leather armchair, its quiet groan punctuating the sudden hush. He idly rotated the remaining liquor in his glass, the ice cubes tinkling a soft melody. He'd weighed her proposition with the gravity it merited. Her firm was a beacon for environmental advocacy, a staunch ally of the disadvantaged, a voice for the silenced. For a lawyer just starting out, it was practically a dream come true. Yet, a nagging feeling held him back, a yearning for a wider scope. "Ms. Evans," he began, his tone even, "I'm profoundly grateful for your offer. More than words can express. The faith you have in my abilities means the world to me." A subtle smile graced her lips. "Understatement, Kai. You were remarkable in court. That grasp of legal subtleties, that fervent dedication, it's a rare find, especially at your age." He dipped his head in acknowledgement. "Thank you. Nevertheless, I must respectfully decline." The smile receded, replaced by unveiled curiosity rather than disappointment. Ms. Evans had witnessed enough careers to understand that even the most alluring opportunities weren't always the right fit. "May I inquire as to why, Kai? I realize you might have competing offers, but I genuinely believe you'd flourish here." Kai placed his glass on the table, the ice completely dissolved by now. "It's not about other offers, Ms. Evans. It's about my trajectory. I need to complete my education. Sounds simple, I know, but there are facets of the law I'm eager to explore, realms beyond environmental law that beckon." He paused, searching for the precise words to convey his vision. "This case, this struggle for my family's land, it sparked something within me, a craving to understand the full spectrum of legal recourse available to those marginalized, to those facing injustice." He continued, "Your firm's work is nothing short of inspiring, and I commend it wholeheartedly. However, I also feel that true effectiveness, genuine advocacy for change, demands a more comprehensive groundwork. I wish to delve into constitutional law, international law, even corporate law, to grasp how power structures function from every conceivable angle. I aspire to be a lawyer with a panoramic view of the chessboard, not just one corner." Ms. Evans tented her fingers, her gaze unwavering. "That's a remarkably mature perspective, Kai. I'm impressed. Most aspiring lawyers are anxious to dive right in, to start making a tangible difference immediately. You're thinking strategically, laying a robust foundation. I believe that's what's required," Kai responded. "This case has shown me that justice isn't always a sprint, it's frequently a marathon. And to compete effectively in that marathon, I need to be thoroughly prepared." He added, "I'm also drawn to academic inquiry. I want to contribute to the legal discourse, to question prevailing assumptions, to help shape the future of land rights jurisprudence." Ms. Evans gave a slow nod. "So you view your education as an indispensable springboard, not merely a formality." "Precisely," Kai affirmed. And I also intend to explore legal areas that may seem less directly pertinent to environmental or land rights. Criminal justice, for example. Understanding the ingrained biases within the system, how they disproportionately impact vulnerable communities, is essential to grasping the larger tapestry of injustice. Ms. Evans leaned back, a contemplative look on her face. You're considering the interconnectedness of it all. How various forms of injustice bolster one another. Exactly. Kai confirmed. And I believe that a truly effective advocate must comprehend those connections. He drew a breath and pressed on. And, if I may be candid, Ms. Evans, I need to prove to myself that I am more than just a land rights kid. I need to test myself in other legal arenas, to challenge myself in different ways, to see if this passion, this drive, is truly sustainable. Ms. Evans smiled, a genuine, understanding smile. That's an incredibly honest and insightful assessment, Kai. It takes courage to admit your own doubts, especially after such a public display of aptitude. She paused, then added, I respect your decision, Kai. Profoundly. You possess a clear vision for your future, and you're prepared to make tough choices to realize it. That is a hallmark of true leadership. She rose and moved to the window, her gaze sweeping over the vibrant cityscape below. I still believe you have a brilliant future in environmental law, and the offer remains open. If, after completing your education and exploring other paths, you find yourself drawn back to this field, please don't hesitate to reach out. Turning back to him, her eyes conveyed sincerity. And regardless of your ultimate career trajectory, please know that I am here to support you. Consider me a mentor, a resource, a friend. I believe in you, Kai. I believe in your potential to affect real change in this world. Kai stood, a genuine smile lighting his face. Thank you, Ms. Evans. That means more than I can say. He extended his hand, and she clasped it firmly. Don't be a stranger, Kai. Keep me abreast of your progress. And if you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. As Kai left her office, the fragrance of aged paper and lemon wax seemed less constricting, almost comforting. He carried not just her offer, but her unwavering faith in his capabilities. He had charted his course, one that would lead him through academic halls, through the intricacies of legal theory, through the trials of self-discovery. A course demanding dedication, hard work, and an unflinching commitment to justice. But he was ready. More than ready. Outdoors, the autumn air felt sharp and bracing. The city throbbed with life, a symphony of sounds and motion. Kai inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his choice settle around him. He turned down a coveted internship, a prime opportunity to jumpstart his legal career. But he had also reaffirmed his dedication to a broader ideal, one reaching beyond immediate satisfaction, beyond fleeting gains. He had chosen a path toward a deeper comprehension of the law, a more refined understanding of justice, and a more profound knowledge of himself. He withdrew his phone and texted his grandmother. Headed home. Thinking of making that miso soup you taught me. A moment later, her reply pinged. Perfect timing. I bought extra tofu. Come home, little warrior. He smiled. Home. The place where his journey had begun, and where he would find the resolve to press on. The battle for his family's land was far from won. Judge Thompson's decisions were still pending, and Mr. Davies remained a formidable adversary. But Kai knew he wasn't alone. He had his family, his community, and the unwavering support of individuals like Ms. Evans. And he possessed something even more potent, a burning passion to make a difference, to fight for justice, to forge a better world for generations to come. As he walked towards the subway, the city lights shimmering like far-off stars, Kai felt a sense of purpose he'd never known. He was no longer solely Kai Ito, the young man defending his family's land. He was Kai Ito, the future lawyer, the champion of justice, the advocate for the marginalized. And his journey was only just beginning. A changed verdict. The courtroom felt alien. Though physically unchanged, the same mahogany pews, the watchful portraits of bygone justices, the familiar ghost of aged parchment and beeswax, and unfamiliar electricity thrummed. Judge Thompson's prolonged absence since yesterday's recess had fermented into anxious speculation. Murmurs, like eddies in a stream, swirled through the gallery, conjecture, apprehension, and fragile hopes intertwined. At the defendant's table, Kai presented an oasis of calm amidst the mounting unease. He'd spent the intervening hours in meticulous preparation, anticipating every possible thrust from Mr. Davies's legal arsenal. He had also indulged in a small ember of hope, kindled by Judge Thompson's unexpected, almost fatherly, solicitousness. Yet, hope in this arena was treacherous. It could blind one to the cold realities of the law, to the insidious biases clinging to the system like marine growth. He checked the clock above the entrance. Each tick resonated like a hammer blow against his composure. Across the aisle, Mr. Davies radiated an almost unnerving self-assurance, fingers steepled, a self-satisfied smirk playing upon his lips. The judge's aberrant behavior hadn't escaped him. He likely dismissed it as a fleeting irregularity, ripe for exploitation. At long last, the door behind the bench creaked open. Silence descended. Judge Thompson entered transformed. It wasn't simply his bearing, now erect and purposeful. It was something deeper, etched into his visage, a subtle alteration in the crinkles around his eyes. The customary gruffness had receded, replaced by a quiet determination. He didn't immediately seat himself. Instead, he paused, his gaze traversing the room, lingering on Kai. Not a dismissive glance this time, but something approaching, regard? He settled into his chair, the leather sighing softly. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the hushed chamber. Before we proceed, he began, his voice now resonant with an unfamiliar depth. I must address the peculiar circumstances surrounding yesterday's recess. Mr. Davies shifted uneasily, a shadow of concern flitting across his features. I engaged in a discourse. Judge Thompson elucidated, choosing his words with precision. That compelled me to reassess my understanding of this case. My paramount duty is to ensure that justice prevails, a duty demanding an open mind, devoid of prejudice and preconceived notions. He paused, his gaze focused on some distant point beyond the walls. I confess to an initial underestimation of Mr. Ito. He gestured toward Kai. His youth, his lineage. I allowed these factors to tarnish my objectivity. This was an error, for which I offer my apology. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. An apology from Judge Thompson? Unprecedented. Kai remained inscrutable, his expression revealing nothing. Premature celebration was foolish. He knew that words were airy currency, actions held the true value. Judge Thompson refocused on Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, while your arguments are noted, I find they are ultimately outweighed by the compelling evidence presented by Mr. Ito. The historical archives, the elder testimonies, the demonstrable ties between the Ito family and this land, these cannot be overlooked. Mr. Davies's face burned crimson. Your Honor, with all due respect, you establish a perilous precedent. We speak of established property rights, of legal title held for decades. Legality, Judge Thompson retorted, his voice resolute, is not synonymous with justice. The law, in its written form, can sometimes perpetuate inequity. It is the court's responsibility to recognize these instances and to strive for a more just resolution. He lifted a stack of documents, his fingers tracing their edges. I have thoroughly examined the historical record and am persuaded that the Ito family holds a legitimate claim to this land, a claim predating the existing legal structure. To deny this claim would be to sanction a historical wrong, to perpetuate a cycle of dispossession. He looked directly at Kai. Mr. Ito, your devotion to your family, your astute understanding of the law, and your unwavering pursuit of justice are admirable. Your case was presented with remarkable skill and articulation. Kai inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Judge Thompson inhaled deeply. Therefore, he proclaimed, his voice ringing with authority, this court decrees that the land in question be restored to the Ito family. A stunned silence blanketed the room before exploding into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and excited chatter. People surged to their feet, straining to catch a glimpse of Kai. A few began to applaud, the sound quickly cascading through the gallery. Mr. Davies slammed his fist onto the table, his face contorted with fury. "This is an outrage. I shall appeal this ruling, Your Honor. I will carry this to the highest court if necessary." "You are entitled to do so, Mr. Davies," Judge Thompson replied unperturbed. "However, I remain confident that my decision rests upon sound legal principles and a genuine desire to achieve justice." He turned to Kai. "Mr. Ito, congratulations. You have fought valiantly." Kai rose, his gaze meeting Judge Thompson's. "Thank you, Your Honor," he stated, his voice calm and distinct. "I am grateful for your willingness to listen and to weigh the evidence." As the courtroom buzzed, a profound sense of relief washed over Kai. He had prevailed. He had safeguarded his family's legacy. Yet he knew this was merely the first step. The fight for justice stretched onward. Later, as the courtroom emptied, Judge Thompson lingered on the bench, lost in contemplation. The portraits of his predecessors seemed to scrutinize him, their expressions inscrutable. Had he rendered the correct judgment? Had he truly served justice, or merely succumbed to emotion? He recalled the case that haunted him, the one he'd confided to Kai, the case where he had rigidly followed the law, yet condemned an innocent man. He had carried the burden of that decision for years, the knowledge of his failure. Perhaps, in some measure, this ruling served as an attempt to atone for his past transgression. Perhaps it signaled his evolving capacity to see beyond the surface, to recognize the human cost intrinsic to the law. He looked up as Kai approached. "Your Honor," Kai began, his tone respectful, "I wish to express my gratitude again. Your verdict holds immeasurable significance for me." Judge Thompson scrutinized him, his expression unreadable. "You are a remarkable young man, Mr. Ito. You possess a gift for the law, a zeal for justice, and a wisdom exceeding your years. Never allow anyone to diminish your potential to effect change." "I won't," Kai affirmed, his eyes filled with resolve. "And one more thing," Judge Thompson added, a flicker of a smile gracing his lips. "Never hesitate to challenge my assumptions. At times, even judges require reminders of what truly matters." Kai smiled. "I shall keep that in mind, Your Honor." He paused, then added, "I hope this decision brings you some solace regarding your past." Judge Thompson's eyes widened subtly, surprised at Kai's insight into his long-held secret. He quickly regained his composure. "Thank you, Mr. Ito. I appreciate that." As Kai turned to depart, Judge Thompson called out, "Mr. Ito?" Kai halted and turned back. "I have been contemplating," Judge Thompson stated, "your points about systemic injustice. You are correct. The law, as it stands, frequently advantages the powerful while disadvantaging the marginalized. This is an issue demanding attention." "I agree, Your Honor," Kai said, "and I believe that education holds the key to resolving it." "Education?" Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Kai replied. "By educating ourselves about the history of injustice, by comprehending the legal frameworks that perpetuate it, and by crafting innovative legal strategies to challenge it, we can cultivate a fairer and more equitable society." Judge Thompson nodded slowly. "You have a point. But education alone is insufficient. We must also transform the hearts and minds of those who formulate and enforce the laws." "That's true," Kai acknowledged. "However, education can be a potent catalyst for transforming hearts and minds. It can enable individuals to perceive the world from a different vantage point, to empathize with the experiences of others, and to acknowledge the shared humanity that unites us." Judge Thompson pondered this for a moment. "You are a compelling young man, Mr. Ito. I sense you are destined for great accomplishments." "I hope so, Your Honor," Kai said. "I hope so." He turned and departed, leaving Judge Thompson alone on the bench, reflecting upon the words of a young man who had challenged his beliefs, shaken his convictions, and ultimately influenced his life. The weight upon his shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could at last find peace. The portrait of his predecessor seemed to ease, becoming less austere. He had made the right judgment this time. He hoped. A future foretold. The courtroom stilled, not with the abrupt silence of a battlefield, but with a murmuring undercurrent of reflection. The air, seasoned with the aroma of aged timber and lingering apprehension, felt transformed, buoyed by nascent hope. Judge Thompson, still presiding, cleared his throat, the sound magnified in the sudden hush. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping across the onlookers before anchoring on Kai. "Mr. Ito," he began, his voice now imbued with a gravity it previously lacked, tinged perhaps with remorse and an emerging admiration. "I must confess I approached these proceedings with a closed mind." A ripple of sound traversed the room. He dismissed it, his attention fixed on Kai. "I allowed prejudice, impatience, and a frankly misguided confidence in my own judgment to color my perception." He paused, the ensuing quiet punctuated by the steady pulse of an antique clock. "I was wrong. Utterly wrong. Not only regarding the specifics of this case, but concerning the innate potential for fairness that exists within us all, irrespective of age or lineage." He faltered slightly over lineage, betraying the prejudice he still battled. "This court," he resumed, his tone gaining conviction, "is charged with upholding the law, certainly. Yet law, divorced from compassion, from comprehension, is a mere instrument of blunt force." Mr. Ito demonstrated, with remarkable lucidity and articulation, the authentic essence of the law, a principle of impartiality, of justice, and of reconciliation. He illuminated for myself, and perhaps for all present, that justice transcends adherence to precedent. It necessitates actively pursuing truth, even when that truth dismantles our most deeply entrenched convictions. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Ito, your grasp of legal tenets, your skill in deconstructing complex arguments, and your unwavering dedication to your family's legacy were remarkable. In truth, I have rarely witnessed such legal insight, particularly in one so young." A wave of hushed surprise spread through the room. Mr. Davies, rigid in the front row, shifted uncomfortably, a shadow of something, doubt perhaps, flitting across his face. Judge Thompson persisted, his voice resonant with sincerity. "I have overseen countless trials throughout my career. Some inconsequential, some regrettable." A fleeting shadow passed over his features, a ghost of some past case. "However, this matter, and your contribution to it, Mr. Ito, will remain indelible. Not as a simple property dispute, but as a testament to the strength of perseverance, the significance of cultural heritage, and the sheer might of intellect and character." He straightened, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Ito, I say this with utter conviction, you possess a rare and extraordinary gift. A gift to be nurtured, refined, and employed for the betterment of society. I implore you, young man, to consider dedicating yourself to the legal profession." An audible gasp arose from the gallery. Kai, standing firm and collected, met Judge Thompson's gaze. This was unexpected. Justice he had hoped for, fought for, with every breath. But this public validation, this encouragement, far surpassed his expectations. He inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor," he responded, his voice steady despite the tremor of feeling that coursed through him. "Your words are deeply meaningful." "Spoken with absolute certainty, Mr. Ito," Judge Thompson affirmed. "The legal world requires individuals like you, individuals who dare to challenge convention, devoted to fairness, and capable of navigating the intricacies of the law with both skill and empathy." He paused, a faint smile gracing his lips. "And frankly, Mr. Ito, I suspect you would be a fearsome advocate. I would not relish facing you as opposing counsel." A soft murmur of amusement rippled through the room, easing the tension. Even Mr. Davies offered a stiff, mirthless smile. Judge Thompson refocused his attention on the courtroom. "This case, ostensibly concerning a small plot of land, raises crucial questions regarding past injustices, the treatment of native peoples, and the very definition of justice. It is a potent reminder that the law is not fixed, that it must adapt to the evolving needs of society, and now we, as members of the legal community, bear the responsibility of ensuring its equitable evolution." He regarded Kai once more, his expression softening. Mr. Ito, you have sown a seed here today. A seed of aspiration, a seed of transformation. It is my earnest wish that you will continue to cultivate that seed, and that you will utilize your talents to help forge a more just and equitable future for all. He struck his gavel, the sound reverberating through the room. Court is adjourned. A flurry of activity erupted. People pressed forward, eager to congratulate Kai, to express their support, simply to be near him. Ms. Evans, radiant, hurried to his side, embracing him warmly. "I knew you could do it, Kai," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always believed in you." He smiled, returning her embrace. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ms. Evans. Your guidance and support were invaluable." Amidst the commotion, Kai observed Judge Thompson descending from the bench. He waited patiently, allowing the crowd to dissipate slightly before approaching him. "Your Honor," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for everything." Judge Thompson grasped his hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "The gratitude, Mr. Ito, belongs entirely to me. You have reminded me why I chose this profession in the first place." He paused, a hint of melancholy in his eyes. "It is easy to grow weary, to lose sight of justice's true essence. You possess a talent for stripping away the cynicism and getting to the core of things." He hesitated, then added, almost brusquely, "Take my advice, Mr. Ito. Attend law school. Learn all you can. And then return here and stir things up." Kai smiled. "I intend to, Your Honor." "Good," Judge Thompson said, a trace of a smile appearing. "The world needs more lawyers who are willing to fight for what's right, even when it's unpopular." He released Kai's hand and turned to depart. As he walked away, he paused, glancing back. "And Mr. Ito," he said, his voice gentler now, almost fatherly, "never extinguish that fire in your heart. It is what defines you." Kai watched him leave, a profound feeling of gratitude washing over him. He had encountered prejudice, doubt, and outright antagonism, yet he had also discovered allies in the most unexpected places. Judge Thompson, notwithstanding his initial biases, had ultimately acknowledged the truth and acted with courage and integrity. The courtroom, now emptying, felt renovated. Brighter. Optimistic. The air, still laced with the odor of old wood and lingering anxiety, now carried a new scent, the scent of potential. He considered his family, his ancestors, the land so unjustly stolen from them. He had prevailed in this particular battle, but the greater struggle for justice was far from won. True systemic change demanded more than individual triumphs. It required a profound understanding of the law, an unwavering adherence to ethical principles, and the audacity to challenge the very foundations of injustice. He looked at Ms. Evans, her face glowing with pride. He knew what awaited him. He would take Judge Thompson's counsel. He would attend law school. He would learn everything. And then he would return. He would return and fight. Not just for his family, but for all those relegated to the margins, oppressed, and denied their rightful place. He would wield the law, not as a weapon of oppression, but as a tool for liberation, for healing, for the creation of a truly just and equitable world. The future stretched before him, immense and unknown, yet imbued with purpose, with destiny. He was Kai Ito, and he was prepared to fight. The courtroom stood empty, but the echoes of Judge Thompson's final words still resonated. "You have planted a seed here today. A seed of hope, a seed of change." He knew what he must do. He would nurture that seed. He would make it flourish. The boy wondered. The courtroom doors flew open, and Kai recoiled from the sudden blaze. This wasn't the dappled sunlight he knew, filtered through guava leaves at home. This was an aggressive, manufactured radiance, a swarm of camera flashes wielded by unfamiliar faces. Black, fuzzy microphones thrust toward him, resembling bizarre, oversized insects. A cacophony of questions, overlapping and insistent, hammered at his eardrums. "Mr. Ito, your reaction to the ruling? Is it true you argued your own case? What's next for you? How did you prepare?" He was submerged, the recent surge of triumph already dissolving in a tidal wave of media clamor. A firm, reassuring hand clamped onto his shoulder. Ms. Evans, her expression resolute, stood beside him. "Give him air to breathe," she commanded, her voice slicing through the din like a keen knife through thick stalks. "He's just secured a monumental win for his family and their heritage. Show some decency." She carved a small space around him, enough for him to manage. I only wanted to safeguard my family's legacy." A reporter, her gaze sharp and probing, pressed closer. "But you're not an attorney, Mr. Ito. Where did you get your legal expertise?" He hesitated, grappling with how to convey the years immersed in law books, the countless evenings absorbing his grandfather's land narratives, the burning indignation that fueled him. "I learned," he stated simply. "I had no choice." Ms. Evans interjected again. "This young man is extraordinary. He's proof of what knowledge can do and the power of principled action. He'll issue a formal statement later." She guided him through the throng, her grip a reliable anchor. Strobe lights continued to detonate, temporarily stealing his sight. He felt exposed, like an insect impaled on a pin, his every twitch and stammer under a microscope. He risked a quick backward glance. He spotted Mr. Davies near the courthouse entrance, his face a study in apoplectic fury. Their gazes locked for a split second, a silent collision of wills. Then Ms. Evans propelled him forward, away from the tumult and toward the relative calm of her car. The ensuing days became a vortex. Kai's visage became ubiquitous, splashed across newsprint and web pages. Television pundits dissected his performance, analyzing his arguments and marveling at his poise. He was christened with monikers: the legal eagle, the prodigy advocate, and, to his chagrin, the savior of paradise. The Ito family's humble dwelling, nestled amidst the Taro terraces, became a magnet for reporters and well-wishers alike. He received calls from long-lost relatives, all eager to offer congratulations and support. Strangers stopped him on the street, extending their hands and expressing gratitude for his valor. Initially, the attention felt oppressive, disorienting. He battled imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud who had inadvertently stumbled onto center stage. He yearned for the familiar tranquility of his old existence, the cadences of the land, the comforting quiet of his grandfather's tales. One evening, as he sat on the porch swing with his grandmother, watching fireflies illuminate the dusk, he voiced his unease. "It's overwhelming, Tutu," he confessed, using the Hawaiian term for grandmother. "I don't know how to navigate this." His grandmother, her face a roadmap of wisdom, offered a gentle smile. "The gale doesn't ask the tree if it's prepared to bend before it descends, Kai. It simply howls. The test lies in the tree's resilience. You are strong, Kai. You possess the unwavering roots of your ancestors. Let the wind lift you, but never allow it to shatter you." Her words, both simple and profound, reverberated within him. He grasped that retreating from the limelight was no longer an option. This was no longer a personal matter. It concerned his family, his community, and countless others who had been silenced and marginalized for generations. He began granting carefully considered interviews, leveraging his newfound visibility to spotlight the historical grievances that had plagued his people. He spoke of preserving cultural heritage, safeguarding ancestral lands, and guaranteeing equitable opportunities for future generations. He also made a point of commending Judge Thompson. While lingering resentment towards the judge persisted within the community due to his initial hesitation, Kai acknowledged the significance of his eventual shift in perspective. He emphasized the importance of empathy and openness, of being willing to confront one's own prejudices. Inevitably, not all the media coverage was positive. Some conservative commentators branded him as a radical firebrand, accusing him of revisionist history and undermining the tenets of the legal system. Others dismissed him as a naive dreamer, a young man detached from the pragmatic realities of the world. Mr. Davies, predictably, launched a public relations campaign aimed at discrediting Kai and painting him as a rabble-rouser. He granted interviews to favorable media outlets, alleging that Kai was manipulating the system for personal gain and that his claims of historical injustice were embellished and unsubstantiated. But Kai remained undeterred. He was convinced he occupied the moral high ground. He was fighting for a cause far greater than himself. And he knew he had the steadfast support of his family, his community, and an expanding coalition of allies who shared his vision of a fairer future. One fateful day, an envelope arrived from a prestigious law school on the mainland. Inside was a letter of acceptance, accompanied by a substantial scholarship. He had submitted the application almost as an afterthought prior to the trial, never genuinely anticipating acceptance. Now, clutching the letter, he felt a mixture of elation and apprehension. Attending law school meant leaving his family, leaving his homeland, leaving everything secure and familiar. It would be a formidable undertaking, a plunge into the unknown. Yet he knew he had to proceed. He needed to arm himself with the knowledge and skills necessary to continue the fight for justice. He shared the acceptance letter with his grandfather, who had served as his unwavering bedrock of strength and inspiration throughout the ordeal. The old man's eyes sparkled with pride. "Go, Kai," he urged, his voice weathered but resolute. "Learn all that you can. Become a champion for your people. But never sever your ties to your roots." That night, Kai sat on the beach, listening to the mesmerizing rhythm of the surf. The moon was at its zenith, bathing the water in a silvery luminescence. He reflected on the recent events, the trials he had endured, the victories he had achieved. He knew the path ahead would be long and arduous. But he was prepared. He was no longer merely Kai Ito, the boy from the taro fields. He was Kai Ito, the protector of his family's land, the voice of his community, the legal eagle, who had dared to challenge the establishment. And he was resolved to employ his newfound influence to effect meaningful change in the world. He would train as a lawyer, not merely to interpret the law, but to reshape it, to wield it as an instrument for liberation and redress. The recollection of Mr. Davies's enraged expression surfaced in his mind, and for a fleeting moment, a spark of something resembling satisfaction flickered, quickly superseded by an unwavering determination. This wasn't about securing a personal triumph. It was about achieving systemic reform. He drew in the salty air, feeling the cool caress of the breeze on his skin. He closed his eyes, conjuring the images of his ancestors, their spirits watching over him, guiding him on his chosen course. He felt a profound sense of peace and purpose settle within him. He was ready for battle, armed not with weapons, but with insight, with passion, and with an unshakable commitment to righteousness. The skirmish for his family's land had ended, but the greater conflict for equality and justice had only just begun. And he, Kai Ito, was ready to fight on,